All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am the memes of destruction here, and we are being hosted by Bold Like a Leopard, and we're going to do a quick recap of this past week's Democratic debates. So these are the first two debates. It's technically the first, split up into 10 candidates each for the Democratic national nomination. We're trying it out here. We're going to just kind of review over that. We might devolve into a few other topics, but let's just start off with Bold. How are we doing today, my man?
Oh man, it's like sweltering hot over here. I'm glad I'm indoors and that my AC is working. Actually, it got a little cool enough so I could turn off the AC. So, you know, I'm still able to enjoy this hot coffee, even though it's,
you
you know,
you got to reach that
uh,
level of homeostasis there, where you get the balance, dude. It's been thundering, it's raining, it just stopped raining. The skies might open up, so if all of a sudden I disappear, hopefully it's only power and I haven't been carried off by a tornado.
yeah.
So.
Last week we were having flooding here, so it's it's pretty crazy how much rain there's been this season. Almost as if the world is going to end in 12 years. But anyway, yeah, the debate was crazy and very tiring because I watched it on the Hard Bastard channel. So it took 3 hours instead of two. So I don't know how you watched it, but
I started off. I think I listened to some of the initial ones. I think one night I was listening through David Pakman for the first 20, 30 minutes. Then I finished listening to it just in podcast form, just via the NBC link. The next night, I think I listened to 20, 30 minutes from through Lords of the Night. And then I listened to the rest of it the next day, just through the standard link as well as a podcast. Unfortunately, when I did it in podcast form, for some reason, Senator Booker and Mr. Castro, they sounded the same to me. I confused some of the stuff, especially when they were speaking in Spanish and stuff like that, just because I didn't have the visual cue there. So I'm like, oh, I definitely conflated some of what they both said, although in some ways they were talking about a lot of the same stuff. So, where would you like to start? How about highlights? What were some of the better things that we heard over the past 2 days there?
well, I think the highlights depend on who, like, what your priorities are. I think if you're somebody who was looking for the clearest vision on immigration policy, you weren't really finding a good front runner because a lot of them, I would say that the person who was clearest on it was Castro, who said he would repeal the section of the U.S. Criminal Code regarding illegal immigration. So that was, it was pretty ballsy move. But also, by the way, I think it's the wrong move, but it was pretty. It showed
He
that he
he
has.
he, he took a bold position there. You may not agree with the man, but he was clear with his position there. It wasn't quite like Vice President Biden's response of that person should not be the focus of this issue. I mean, he's just dodging the question there, right?
Yes, as Beto would say, Julian Castro showed that he has muy grandes cojones.
No,
So,
no. I mean,
yeah.
power to it. And you know what? That generated a buzz for him. He's started to see some support as well there. The immigration thing, though, I mean, I believe it was the New York Times or there was an op-ed. I believe there was an editorial report saying that I believe it was the one that Tim Pool covered where they were going about and just saying that's, well, a lot of the Democrats just took a very strong left position there. And there's fear that they might be alienating themselves from a vast majority of the Democratic Party, who, while they support many of the things that they do have some concerns, like a lot of voters perhaps in the Midwest, which, I mean, up there, that's what really sealed President Trump's victory the last time round. So I don't know. What do you think as far as, is this a positive thing for the Democratic Party? Is this, do they have the narrative and the plan to actually implement these things, or are they just kind of throwing meat to the base?
No, they're really treading in very, very dangerous water here, and it reminds me in many ways of a few Republican candidates, if you're talking about parallels in the past, who were talking about similar issues, especially I'd say Rick Santorum. A couple, and not that Rick Santorum was the worst candidate. I'm just saying in many ways, he was the person who was saying, "Well, I'm gonna basically implement Catholic theology as president." In many ways, so in this case, which is the counter example, you see a lot of these Democrats are playing up policies that are popular among immigration activists, but here in the Midwest, especially, this type of move that Julian Castro's proposing would probably lose him all of the states that Trump gained in 2016, plus possibly Minnesota, and I think Virginia would be in danger too for them.
Okay. So I mean, and again, he did differentiate himself there. It's a bold thing. We can definitely argue over the feasibility and what it would actually entail, but it sounds like because they had a bunch of folks raise their hands for some of these questions and stuff. It's like, all right, you're just giving everybody the chance to just kind of go along. I mean, I remember even Vice President Biden got called out because they weren't sure if he raised his hand or not on one of those particular issues. So I mean,
well, that was the second night. So
right.
The whole problem is I think that there's a difference between what the Democrats think is important for Americans and what people actually want to hear addressed. So when you heard Andrew Yang, and I think Andrew Yang had a poor debate performance. Some people are saying that, or he's actually claimed that his mic was off during a couple of times when he tried to interject. But overall, I would still grade his debate performance to be poor because of a couple of things he said. But he was addressing economic issues that are a little more universal, and I think that was the right approach to take. But the only other person I saw who really went and gave a position that was more all-encompassing for all Americans was Gabbard with her remarks about the Iraq War. Although, yeah, you could say, the healthcare debate, that's something everybody could get, everybody would have like an interest in it. I just think it was so confusing that you don't know who really committed to what.
Well, see, I think this is one of Mayor Pete's breakout moments there, because while most everyone up on that stage is for some form of universal coverage, he was very clear that he did not want to abolish private insurance. He was looking something more along the lines of like the UK or Canada, where, yes, they do have a form of universal coverage, but at the same time, they have private coverage as well. And I remember it was actually Cabby who explained in a way that made a lot of sense to me back in the day. He said over there in the UK, you have a certain amount of money that comes out of your wages to pay for healthcare. If you should elect to receive private healthcare, the money that would normally come out is basically credited towards your actual private healthcare. And again, I might be incorrect how I'm restating this, but the way he had described it at the time, I'm like, well, that seems like it seemed fair in that you could elect to receive your private coverage, but in case you did not have the means to acquire that private coverage, you weren't going to be dying in the street. You might have to wait, but it's one of those things where wait times are an actual thing that exists in every single system. And again, we could argue over the scalability and how each system is implemented, but I do believe that was a bold differentiation, and I do think that scored him a lot of points with many Democrats who might be a little hesitant of an abrupt, immediate change.
Yeah, so. I think what he's talking about is a repeat of the public option debate, and like you said, it sounds more prudent than the other options. But somebody like me, for example, I would definitely find it unacceptable. I would never vote for such a thing because I've been researching this topic for a while, including the lawsuits in Canada by private surgery clinics that want to be able to provide surgery to people that don't want to wait in the lines, and then they have to fight the provincial governments and then get into and then the insurance companies also have to, because there's activists over there that are so it's really, Mayor Pete probably in his mind thinks that it's going to be a nice compromise, but when you see the fact is that I think the president that implements a major health initiative, at a certain point, the momentum is going to fall out of the president's hand because, first of all, they end up going out of office. Second of all, it ends up being the purview of the administrator. So Barack Obama might have thought that that Obamacare was a great idea when it came out, and I think he probably didn't research it enough. But at a certain point, it became clear that whatever he thought it was going to be, that's not what was happening, because the commitments that he was making were plainly false after the fact. And the system actually unraveled similar to the way that a lot of its critics were saying. But yeah, I think there were a lot of people who were warning about the effect of ending private insurance. I know that Hickenlooper or Bennett, Delaney, the first night was saying, yeah, this is really like dangerous territory, guys. And then you saw, I think it was either Kyle Kalinske or Tim Black was saying, get this asshole off the stage, fuck him. It was pretty funny.
I do remember. I think that may have been one of Kyle's videos where he was being critical of some folks. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty to be critical over, and especially you're within the primary debate where people generally acknowledge, for better or worse, that a lot of folks just throw meat to their base, because that's a lot of the primary individuals that will be voting in these elections. I mean, again, it depends on the state. I know up here in Massachusetts, I have the choice as an independent. I can pick either ballot that I want. So, I mean, then again, that can lead to potential opposition voting. But then again, if somebody has the right to vote and those are the laws of the land, then I mean, it is what it is, man. So, okay. So how about other major things that could be positive to the Democratic voting base that could have been taken away? Do we think there were any superstar standouts?
The superstar standout that I think is she has crossover appeal. She's like the Allen Iverson of the party, is Gabbard, because of her anti-war message. And that's about, the rest of her stuff I don't think is even her focus. I think in many ways her domestic policy is largely in line with Sanders or with any of the other left-leaning Democrats, but her commitment to looking for a diplomatic solution to the crisis with Iran, I think, is something that resonated well beyond just the Democratic base. I don't think it's going to help her, because the fact is that I think many Democrats have resolved to ignore the lessons of the Bush foreign policy years, when the Democrats were basically in favor of the war so they could criticize Bush, and now they're basically calling her an Assad puppet, and she's also come out during the debate. In fact, she didn't have her sister do it, but her sister did tweet out from her account that the debate was being used in order to promote Elizabeth Warren. And she's come out since then and said, look, the DNC is showing that they're picking winners here. So I would say, and this is me, but it's not just me, it's a lot of people, that Tulsi Gabbard had the most impressive performance. Eric Swalwell, if you want to talk about just debate performance, I think had a good one. But I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested to hear your impressions of who did the best.
I would have to give some pushback to that. Although I do like Tulsi, I thought her debate performance it's not where it necessarily could have been. And I think that may just come down to her personality. She's very calm. She's very, very reserved. And that is something that I like. However, I do think there were certain opportunities where if she had a little bit more initiative, she could have hammered some more points home. I do like the message, but it's kind of like you said. I mean, everyone has bias, and then how much can we actually fault the moderators for certain things? Because there are the more popular candidates, there are going to be certain questions that the public do want to hear about. So it's also a very strange thing where if you have somebody that's within like the top 3 or 4 candidates, a lot of times they want to avoid making major missteps to fall down, while other candidates very often have to be either more bold or say something that's kind of out there at a time to try to get some a little bit more push. And I did definitely catch your border reference from last time, because I do remember Mr. Herman Cain, Mr. 999. We're going to build a 20-foot tall fence, electrified, with a sign on both sides that says, "Keep back, this will kill you." And he went up a point in the polls for about a day, and then after they said, "Are you really going to build an electrified 3,000-mile fence on the border?" People realized, "Oh no, I was just being hyperbolic." That's why when Donald Trump came around, it's like, "I'm going to build a big, beautiful wall." I'm like, that's the less crazy thing from the last time around, so it could actually be a feasible message. But I digress. As far as standout performances as well, I'll be straight up. Bill de Blasio, I mean, for all the criticism he got for going into the debates, I thought he had a very solid performance because he was sharing his own life experience. Apparently, they're releasing some text messages from him and his son. Apparently, some folks saying that just.
Yeah.
I mean, it seemed kind of silly.
Oh, I know what you're talking about now. Yeah.
But I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure if they're real. But as far as actually going up there and trying to convey his message, you can say the man was pandering. But as far as the mimetic that I took away from what I thought he was going to be and how he actually performed, I'd say he had a more positive performance there. I'm trying to think of some other key highlights. I mean, just so much of it. I think
to your point about
so much.
I think to your point about de Blasio and Gabbard, the fact is that I think Gabbard said the more important things, but unlike de Blasio, it took her getting this. Like Tim Ryan started this whole thing about, oh, we need to be engaged, we need to have our troops over there so they don't go over here, which is essentially what he said. And a lot of people have said that, and that's exactly what the neocon line is. We need to be over there so they don't come over here. And so then that raised her hackle. So she emotionally was able to put herself in the position where she wanted to interject. Whereas in the rest of the debate, she was not really enthusiastic. But de Blasio, to his credit, was able to get the enthusiasm up several times. And he has that huge Big Bird freakazoid physique of his that he can wave around like a fucking car blow up, like what I'm talking about. Those
the wacky wild inflatable
the wacky
flailing
arms.
tube,
yeah.
man.
That's him, and he's able to get the attention on stage, and I think it did him good during the debate. Unfortunately, I think if he does attract any sort of percentage in the polls, it will be pretty easy for one of the other candidates to zero in on him and say, well, I mean, aren't you the guy who screwed up the housing system in New York and people don't even have heat and people. So, it's that would be a flash in the pan performance. But I think everybody agreed he had a great day.
And that's also one of those things where it kind of reminds me of the whole Batman mantra from you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain, because that, whether we like to admit it or not, I think was one of Secretary Clinton's downfalls this previous presidential election. It's just she'd been in the public eye for so long that if you're around there so long, people are going to see your positive things and your mishaps. But here's the thing, we're all human beings, dude. We all have mishaps, and it's very easy to just hammer home and just do very negative, slanderous politics, because as MC has said, it has historically worked through all of history. This is just one of those things. It's like when it comes, but see, my issue with this is when it comes down to, all right, I'm not voting for this person because of X, Y, or Z. They've done all these horrible things. We're playing to the lowest levels, and we're voting for who we hate least. And that just, I think people are sick and tired of that. That's why when you have individuals like a Bernie Sanders or even an Andrew Yang that has a very positive message that we can do these things, you can argue about how they're going to go about it and whether or not it would actually work or even be feasible. Those are fair critiques that you can actually have. But it's at least a positive message. And at least if there's one thing that I learned from sales, it's that, yeah, you can demonize your competition left and right. And will that work in the short term? Sure. But just over time, a more positive, uplifting message does always seem to carry the day. And again, this is also one of the things where the media comes in, because if the media is sharing that message, you will feel more positive. However, if we only ever focus on the negatives, then you're going to just lose hope and just, I don't know, end up in the position that I think we're tending towards.
Well, so I mean, you're mentioning things about people being angry at candidates and disliking them, but I think that the real problem is so yeah, there is the concept of forgiveness in American politics in many cases, but it's only forgiveness if people think you're sincere. So when you bring up the case of Hillary Clinton, well, the fact is that during the 2016 race, if she would have not done the things, or the DNC wouldn't have facilitated the things that happened with Bernie Sanders and with skewing the vote, and in some cases clearing the voter rolls and the cheating in the debates and all the other ways they put the thumb on the scales, I think that there would have been more unity when they went into the convention. But we're already seeing signs that, first of all, the wedge that they drove back in 2016 hasn't healed at all. And then it's possibly going to get worse this year. You can see several wedges getting pushed into there, which you can see on the debate stage. So, like I said, when Tulsi Gabbard tore into Tim Ryan, and I think she's ended Tim Ryan's run, because his only appeal now, his appeal at the beginning, so this is another candidate, was, so he's from out in Youngstown, which is pretty close to where I was just working, and his appeal is to the middle class industrial workers, and his job was to broaden his appeal to the rest of the country by saying, hey, I can leverage this voter base in order to expand our party and win back some of the voters that we lost. Now he's canceling that out by losing the anti-war Democratic voters. So the real issue that you have to think about when you're running, and you're talking about a positive message. So when you have a candidate like Andrew Yang, I think he's bringing a positive message. I don't know if he can stay positive in the atmosphere that's going on right now. Can he go through an entire election season without attacking another candidate? It's going to be pretty interesting, because he's basically a newcomer. He's in the den of the lions. But if you're talking about some of these other candidates, they're basically running away from their records, especially Gillibrand, for example. She's running away from the record with her Me Too advocacy, which is blowing up all the time now. A lot of people are rejecting that movement. She has connections to NXIVM, things like that. So it is an issue when you have things in your personal history that people can bring up and say, hey, you're it's just like the girl in high school who she got caught sucking off the janitor or something. Some things just never go away.
Well, I think that may have been a perhaps other kid. And again, I'm not really well versed in that as well. As far as public policy and everything goes, I do tend to agree in that Andrew Yang, when he first came out, his first actual time there, when he was just going over like the reason why he was running and everything, I thought he was so extremely strong. He was using numbers, he was using statistics, he was speaking confidently, he felt very strong. It's just as soon as we started getting into some of the more non-economic issues, I do think he kind of faltered there, and he definitely could have been stronger, or maybe these are things. I'm not sure if he's fully thought it out yet. I mean, I'm sure it's on his website. I haven't reviewed that. That's probably something that I probably should have done in preparation for this, that I should continue to do in the future. But at this point, I'm just basing on what I've heard from him say on either like the Joe Rogan podcast and everything. And he even said his big thing is it isn't necessarily if he gets elected. It's the fact that he wants to promulgate like these ideas as potential solutions for the coming future of mass automation. And we're going to be seeing a huge paradigm shift within these next 40 to 50 years. And I've heard folks that are much more leftish folks and folks that are much more rightish folks saying that this is a major issue and something that we need to take into consideration. And then, since we brought up Mr. Yang, so what are we thinking about the whole mic gig thing? Because apparently now Marianne Williamson, she's saying there were a couple of times where her mic was not hot as well. Do we think this was just a technical difficulty, a mishap, or perhaps maliciousness?
Look, I don't know if you can really trace it back. You'd have to really investigate it. And the question is if there's people who would be willing to, come forward and tell their story of how they were running the tech, the tech side of the debate. there were tech mishaps the first night, so it's
Right.
not as if they had. I mean, they could maybe blame that on
That
the.
is true. You know
Yeah.
what? I didn't even connect those two. So that is true. It's not out of the realm of possibility that there could be mic issues, because if they confused whose mics they were, was this? I'm curious. I'm gonna have to go back and look to see at those points in the debate where their mics weren't on, if that was shortly after they had changed out other individuals. That is interesting. But I
Yeah.
mean, to me, it is concerning that if anything like that were to happen, I mean, that's just beyond the pale in my mind. Go on.
Well, I think that there's definitely it's not a coincidence that they didn't turn off Kamala Harris's mic, or they didn't turn off Buttigieg's mic. It's in my opinion that they did. If they did something, it's no coincidence that they did it to one of the insurgent candidates, Andrew Yang, or if I didn't know about Marianne Williamson claiming the
This
same
is just
thing.
something that this is something that Tim Pool had just cited about an hour or two ago.
Right. So
That there are
I
claims.
think that they are putting their thumb on the scale, and it's kind of. I mean, put yourself into the minds of the DNC. Right now, all that they're using as benchmarks in order to have candidates qualify for the debates are polling numbers and fundraising. The guy who is killing it with fundraising is Andrew Yang, and they're from small donors and everything, and people are, he does have a enthusiastic voting base. I don't know if it'll survive in the long term because what he said about Russia, I think, was a deal breaker for some people, but with their interest is not to keep these people in the debates. Their interest is to narrow down the field so that they can finally figure out who's going to be their person to go forward. So they don't want these candidates coming and putting their confusing agendas about real issues into the debate when they could just talk about who's the most stunning and brave candidate. And that's really why you're seeing after the first debates, there's a huge emphasis on Warren. There's a big emphasis now again on Kamala Harris after she had a horrible, first few months of the campaign season. So
She did not have the best of certain interviews and stuff like that. What was it? The whole I was smoking pot while listening to Tupac 2 years before his album ever launched or something.
yeah, and in the end, I think that you're not going to see, as much as, and in truth, I don't think I would vote for Tulsi Gabbard over Donald Trump. The reason that I think many people on the right hope that she does well is because they are in fear that one of these other people that will win the nomination. Let's say, for example, if you're somebody from the libertarian perspective, if you see a possibility that Kamala Harris wins the presidency, you're freaking out because she is a gun grabber. If you see a possibility that one of these people, even Joe Biden recently, I think in the debate he even said, "Oh, the only guns we should have are the ones that have identification technology." So those are things that are huge red lines. In my state, this would be a huge, negative, and it would drive everybody out to vote against the Democratic nominee. So some people are hoping that you'll get somebody who's a little more normal, like Tulsi Gabbard, which is surprising to say because she did support Bernie Sanders in 2016. And they're hoping that she could at least inject a little bit of normalcy into the debate. But all of her normalcy has to do with foreign policy. I'm sure if you asked her about the abortion issue, if you asked her about, she's crumbled in terms of she used to be for the Defense of Marriage Act. Well, now she's just like the rest of the Democrats. Most of the country has moved and accepted same-sex marriage. But yeah, I think she's become a gun grabber just like the rest of them. And if you're really from the other side of the aisle, the only thing that any of them offers is her because she happens to be anti-war.
The whole thing with that biometric scanning and stuff like that to utilize said firearm. Okay, let me entertain that idea. It's like, and it was trying to be put on the actual manufacturers. I'm just like, okay, I suppose that technology could work, but to do that on scale for every single firearm, I'm just like, and are you taking away from because the firearm, it is a tool. You can argue that tool is to stop things, whatever that may be, whether it is to defend yourself from another human being, whether it's to defend yourself from a wild animal, whether it's to go hunt your dinner. It's you're putting just such a cost on it as well, and I'm not necessarily sure its feasibility. Again, I could look into that. I know modern technology is amazing, but my big thing is they literally had the moderators asking if they were looking to do some form of a federal buyback, which to me really kind of sounds like a confiscation program. And the thing that bothers me, man, is when we have these debates, I hear all these things being proposed. It's like, all right, I might be a liberal Democrat that believes in progress, but at the same time, I got to acknowledge we got the Constitution. And if many of these things that I hear, it's like, I never hear anyone say, it's like, all right, if we're going to do these things, it does not, we still have the Second Amendment. And if we want to have a discussion about potentially amending the Second Amendment, we can have that discussion, but I don't hear anyone trying to have that discussion. We're just trying to do it from alternative means. So it's like, that's what really bothers me when they start putting stuff like that out. We're having very different discussions. Like you said, man, if you're viewing that from the other side of the aisle, you're sitting there and it's like, if I was a conservative in some of these areas, I'm like, I would probably be kind of freaking terrified. And that kind of goes into the whole when President Obama literally was the best firearm salesman the country has ever seen, because people feared he was going to do something, but it ends up being President Trump, who ran under the Republican ticket, to actually start implementing firearms restrictions.
Yeah, and that's one of the main concerns. You know, you have some of these people who are big, gun rights advocates, and the fact is that Trump has implemented the bump stock ban, and some of the real Trump worshippers, they're saying, well, it's only the bump stocks. Well, now we're talking about suppressors after Virginia Beach. So,
dude, it's that's the thing. Is it an infringement upon the Second Amendment? Yes, it is. You could argue that it's a throwaway, but my big thing with the whole bump stock ban is you now have individuals that purchase said items legally that now could be charged with a felony for possessing these things. I don't know about you, man, but that seems like a violation of ex post facto there. And that's one of those things that just really bothers me about this.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think that gun rights they're still a civil right, whereas, I think it's the same issue that I have with abortion. The abortion issue is that we're talking about a medical procedure that is being treated right now as a cultural, a cultural rite of passage by the left. And people on the right are trying, people on, I would say like the real doctrinaire right, are saying, well, there should never be any abortions. When in reality, yeah, there are some instances where, of course, I think it should be, sanctioned. For example, talking about health or danger to the life of the mother. But, in the culture that we're living in, the Democrats and their lobbyists, the Planned Parenthood lobbyists, and a lot of these feminists like Lena Dunham, they're turning the actual act of an abortion into a virtue. So really, this is pushing me even further to the pro-life side of the spectrum than I was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And the same thing with the gun debate. So when I hear, like you said, during the debate, there was Eric Swalwell was calling for a nationwide mandatory buyback. And then, somebody asked Bernie Sanders about it because he'd previously been a little more moderate on gun rights. And Swalwell was like, well, will you push for the mandatory gun buyback? And Sanders was basically, yeah, I guess I'll do it, yeah. It's like, dude, either you believe that people do have the right to own a firearm and you agree that the Constitution spells out exactly what the parameters are, shall not infringe, or you do not. Okay, so, he talks a lot about, we have a lot of hunters up in Vermont, because there's, muskrat and whatever. It's like, fuck you. I don't think that Patrick Henry was running around like trying to avoid muskrats going into his asshole or something. It's really an issue of are people entitled to maintain something that is A, for self-defense from other people, and B, possibly, and this is something that most people don't want to acknowledge, but yeah, if there's a government that falls into tyranny, which happens in some countries, there's countries like Greece that were once democracies for a while, then they become military dictatorships, and then eventually they have to, that there's a change and they move back to democracy. But when you have to guarantee an individual's right to that, that's one of the reasons that it was put into the Constitution. People like Bernie Sanders are essentially ignoring it when they just talk about the hunters.
See, and actually, quickly, to be fair to Senator Sanders, I remember when he was going through, he was specifically saying, as far as hunting and everything, but then again, he did specify, he's like, these weapons of war. So what I take away from that is basically any type of rifle that has any type of semi-automatic functionality along with a capacity that exceeds whatever level they want to specify. I mean, again, at that point, I do really agree with you, man, that I'm looking at the time the Constitution was created, and one of the reasons why we had the Bill of Rights, it's like, all right, there are certain things that we need to make sure that we enshrine here for a number of reasons. We were just getting out of the revolution where that was an issue. We basically had a revolution and revolted from Great Britain at the time. We're like, you know what? Peace out. We're not going to have settle for taxation without representation, and that's one of the things that we put in. And we've actually seen that play out. That was one of the differences between Egypt and Libya. And even at the time, even Colonel Gaddafi, Muammar Gaddafi, the leader of Libya, he straight up said, like, Libya, he's like, we are not Egypt. We have guns. And you look at the situations currently in Egypt and Libya, and there is a vast difference there. Again, I realize MC's probably going insane with me in the chat saying there are many geopolitical differences as well. Yes, those are absolutely factors. But just the same thing, it's like the sheer fact that people have the ability to fight back basically discourages tyranny. And I do think that is a check that the First plus Second Amendment helped make us free. I can hate tragedies like this and that, but it's like, again, we end up not having the conversation we really should have. If you want to restrict people's access to firearms, you're talking about amending the Constitution or the Second Amendment thereof. But we just don't hear that. And actually, to just go back to actually, no, this I just one more thing on this point. Is this one of the things why we're starting to see a lot of liberal media out papers and everything, these media institutions, you're starting to see a lot of these op-eds, whether it's the New York Times, whether it's Forbes, whoever it might be, they're ending up telling a lot of the Democrats that be careful how far you push the pendulum. We understand you're playing to your base, but if you end up alienating folks that kind of like I believe you used to be kind of a Bernie supporter yourself, maybe didn't agree with the man on everything.
Oh no, that wasn't me. That was one of the other people maybe you're thinking of Lennon McCarthy.
Okay. No, I'm probably thinking of Tim Pool. My apologies. So
that'll be the last time anybody confuses me with Tim Pool.
No.
Yeah.
No. You guys both put up videos on the news and you write articles and stuff like that. I mean, I'd consider you a journalist, I believe. So, or at least a commentator at the bare minimum. But what I'd say, what's going on here is, do we think that we're actually going to be able to bring things around? Do you think that the Democrats are they just virtue signaling for the sake of virtue signaling to kind of get their name and stuff out there to just try to win the nomination? Or do you think they're putting out things that could be feasibly run on as actual platforms to defeat President Trump?
No, they're trying to herd cats. They have a real problem on their hands because of 2016. The fact is that there need to be other political parties besides the main two. And the Republicans are simply a little better at, keeping their coalition together. It's not perfect on the Republican side, but you're not seeing a lot of, open hostility, at least not to the degree that you're seeing within the Democratic ranks. I think the neocon faction of the Republican Party is I'm talking about just the party activists. They're really, their ship is sinking. They do have some influence, obviously, in the cabinet with John Bolton, but on the Democratic side, you have a major fissure between people who are, I would say, corporate Democrats who want just simply to be able to take lobbying money and just go along with the flow and write these regulations along with pharmaceutical companies and the banking industry. People like Maxine Waters, by the way, who have a very cozy relationship with corporate America, but they have a progressive facade. And then you have an increasingly insurgent progressive side that's electing people all over the place. And we're not just talking about the people in Congress like Ocasio-Cortez. I know she says it's like a insult just to use one of her last names.
No. Thank you. It's an excellent
yeah,
last name.
but yeah. So her and Ilhan Omar, they are the ones grabbing the platform, the big headlines. But if you look in New York City, they essentially elected a new district attorney for Queens, who's going to be letting people go for petty crime. So it's going to be a free for all over there. You see people across state houses, especially in Pennsylvania. It's come to my attention in a story that I'm currently working on. They have people who are way, way, way to the left on the climate change agenda, which, by the way, most people are not really interested in climate change. So they have a real fissure within the Democratic Party, and unfortunately, they didn't realize until it's too late that the difference is not just in who you're voting for or what's between a person's legs or what color their skin is. There's a real mindset difference between somebody who votes for, let's say, let's throw out a name, Joe Biden, and somebody who would vote for this Julian Castro. They're just not the same thing. So the Democrats are really in a bind because once the debate field does narrow, after Iowa, I think 3 or 4 candidates are for sure going to drop out. Some of them could drop out even before that because their funding will dry up. But it's not as if these votes are transferable. So they're going to have to try to herd these people into the party and sheepdog them, which is something that they were doing in 2016. And in the meantime, you are seeing issues like what Williamson and Yang are talking about, where certain candidates are not as welcome as others. So no, I don't think that we're talking about a situation that's easy to manage. You're going to have a candidate that will really be able to create a movement, not just to attract votes. And that type of candidate would have to be able to compete with a person who's already created a movement, and that's Trump.
So is the only way to fight populism with populism?
I think at this point, yeah. Other than now, the other thing is, of course, Trump has over a year and a half, or no, it's less than a year and a half until the election. So
we still have a solid year of things that could go terribly wrong for the president. And MC continues to point this out. And I do. It is one of those things because we always speculate. You go back to all the previous races we have, at least in my memory and stuff, and where you are a year out, where you end up being in a very different spot because we still got about like another 6 months before we really start to get into the Democratic primary as well, before any votes are cast. So what can happen between now and then? There's just an infinite number of factors. So we're just basing it upon what we've seen up to this point, and we're just trying to focus on the debates.
Right, and I think that things could go very wrong for Trump if, for example, now the whole Iran crisis, I think, was something that could have gone seriously wrong for him, and I think he's benefited tremendously from his decision not to bomb Iran. And I think, a lot of us were fighting hard, at least through our own, personal circle of people, friends and family, to say, look, this is wrong. I have people who I know who are pro-war, and I said, you're not going to personally suffer from that war because you're too old to go. But for those people who have served in combat, which I know some people, or people like me who did serve, and I served in the Israeli military, if you guys don't know, but when you go there and you do face the risks, you do realize that it's not really the it's not the liberating experience that is made for the movies. There's a lot of drudgery and there's a lot of danger. So I think that Trump did a fantastic. He made a fantastic decision. I don't know if the whole process was great, but he did do something to encourage a lot of people to look at him as a more rational actor. So if he does get into a war between now and then, that could dramatically change something. He's actively trying to prevent an economic crisis. That's something that's to his credit. He's not passively waiting for it to happen because he's lobbying against the Fed. He's doing things in terms of the trade relationships with the rest of the world. So he's doing what he can to prevent that type of crisis that could derail his second term. But there are things that people should remember that could go on in the meantime, between now and the election that could help him too. So I'm not just talking about peace with North Korea. And I'm also not talking just about another trade agreement with China. But what the Democrats are doing in the House concerning the Russia investigation, I think that they're, hurting their chances seriously of winning in 2020 because people, first of all, don't care anymore about the Russian collusion, if they ever did. And second of all, the more that's revealed, the more you see that their version of events was first of all false, and second that you could probably have people who were involved in crafting the whole saga go to jail because they committed actual criminal acts while they were trying to pin fabricated ones on people like Trump and Flynn.
No, that's one of those big things where it's just. And I actually had a discussion with one of my more liberal-minded friends before we started this broadcast because I was pitching him an idea that I actually had wanted to talk to you after the broadcast or before we wrap up on that as well. And one of the things is it really does seem we have a either dual or multi-tiered system where it's like if you happen to be somebody like a Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, it seems as if you're almost too big to prosecute if you're of a certain political nature or something like that. If you happen to, or even just having the means, just even being a high upper level middle class person and stuff, the ability to either yourself or through your connections, your friends, your family to secure just top quality legal representation. I mean, whether we like to admit it or not, that's different than somebody that just kind of down and out that may get caught for the same thing and they just have a public defender. I mean, with all due respect to public defenders, I mean, they're doing a lot of hard work, but they don't have the same resources that somebody from a large legal firm would have. So, I mean, that is something that when I do hear about things like that, combined with the fact of the media acting in its self-interest, trying to make money, especially with the paradigm shift going on right now, seeing so many things transferred to online and YouTube and stuff. People are just getting caught in their different bubbles. Because even I brought up to my buddy, was it the free speech rally that Dr. Shiva initially had over 2 years ago now. And I mentioned that there was some violence and he's like, really? Because he, as far as he knew, overall for the amount of folks there, yeah, I mean, it could have been a lot worse, but even he wasn't really aware that there was an instance where a young lady was pulled down holding onto an American flag and somebody that was a protester got cold-cocked by another protester because they thought they were on the other side. So there was violence. So he didn't know about that. He shared some things that I learned as well. And I really think only by having these discussions and acknowledging that we are more similar than we are different, but we do each possess our own unique life experience, I think only by using that truthful speech can we really move forward. And I realize there are people that disagree, but I don't know. This actually brings me, you want to go into the whole climate change thing and what people were saying on that as well, just because I do think that kind of is an extension of what I was just touching on a bit. The reason why, because even, I believe it was President Biden, it was either President Biden or President Senator Sanders that had mentioned that a lot of their colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't even believe climate change is an issue. And we all know that the climate is changing. I mean, the climate is always changing. What we're actually arguing about is how much of a substantial effect is man-made, basically just polluting, poisoning Mother Earth. Are we having a significant effect? And what can we do to reduce that? I mean, I always go back to the whole Captain Planet, the Planeteers mantra of how about we try to avoid poisoning Mother Earth? I mean, that just seems like something most folks can generally agree upon, rather than coming out there and saying the world is going to end in 12 years. I mean, this is a call we need like World War II. I understand the sentiment. And if there's something we can do about that, I think that's a positive thing. It's just, where are we going to maximize our resources to maximize the benefit for the folks that we are representing? And the sheer fact that the rhetoric has escalated on both sides, and we're starting to see, and I honestly think a lot of this is in reaction to other things. Because I remember it was only like 2 or 3 months ago where I was talking about like somewhere in, I believe, Eastern Europe, they were talking about potential postpartum abortions.
Mhm.
And then within about a month or two, I start seeing legislation getting ready to be passed potentially that's talking about just that. And then I see the other side responding with extremely basically the inverse of that as well. So it just seems to be a continual escalation. But sorry, I bloviate on. But as far as climate change, what do we think? Are they just kind of going further to the left? I remember which candidate is it? Is it Swalwell? Because I remember, is it Swalwell or Bennett or somebody? Some of the more lesser known ones that their major issue is climate change
That's
itself. So
Jay Inslee, yeah, from Washington.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, because that's his core issue, because that's something, if we do have the ability to do something about that and we are affecting it, to not do something about that. I mean, do you kind of get where what I'm trying to kind of lay out, where if a number of folks think that this is a major issue and you have the other side, quote unquote, believing that it's not a factor at all, that's creating emotional responses in people that seem to be leading to a lot of these protests that we're probably seeing, just because they don't feel like their issue that's important to them is being acknowledged. So what are your thoughts on the whole climate change thing as far as the debate and
Yeah,
discourse is going?
so you had like a nice inclusion of the other environmental attitudes. When I was a kid, we had, I remember too, Captain Planet. There was the reduce, recycle, reuse that all the cartoon characters were saying. So those are things that I think are universally popular. People are not. People know that there is an issue with waste disposal. There's the gigantic garbage patches in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. So I don't think that that's really the issue. Those are things that I think it doesn't matter. It's not even just an American issue. People around the world know that there's an issue in terms of disposal of waste, disposal of industrial waste, emissions from factories, things like that. But the climate change lobby. So the thing is that people like Jay Inslee or like Bill de Blasio, who, by the way, is talking about I think he was saying to retrofit all skyscrapers in New York City by 2030, or he would say that we're gonna find these people like up the ass. So, and then he did that press conference at Trump Tower. So those people, they are exploiting this climate change meme in order to promote their own careers. Because the fact is that the regulation that he's seeking to impose in New York City wouldn't be enforceable until 2030. So by then he's not even going to be mayor. It doesn't matter if he's going to be president. He's not going to be mayor. So he's using it essentially as a stepping stone for his new ambition, which is probably going to be president or maybe governor if the presidential campaign doesn't work out. So de Blasio and Inslee, they're managing failed cities and states. If you look at Washington, for example, the state is it's hemorrhaging its middle class. A lot of the people moving in are homeless people or people from the super rich who go to work in big tech over there, and a lot of people who are leaving simply either can't afford it there, or they see that there's no there's no real concern for dealing with the homelessness crisis there, so they're going to other states. And meanwhile, while they're complaining about this climate change, they're blaming all the problems that they're causing on climate change. They're blaming the illegal immigration now on climate change. Who said it in the past week? I think it was Beto was saying that the illegal immigration crisis is caused by climate change. But there's no, I mean, there's so many things that have caused illegal immigration to spike. And then when you say climate change, well, I don't recall that in places like Honduras and in Guatemala there were significant issues. Aside from, I think in Guatemala last year there was a massive volcanic eruption, which is not climate. So, you know, people are really using this for their own ends. And the fact is that even if you were to reduce emissions, like the Green New Deal is calling for, down to, I think they call it the break-even point. They're saying that they could only lower the temperature by a tenth of a degree by 2030. So, look, first of all, these people are, I as an engineer, I know that what they're saying, well, we're going to have to invent new technologies and implement them as fast as possible. Well, you're also implementing new regulations in industry. You're also implementing new requirements in terms of, consumer safety and things like that. So that puts out the introduction to market for those products further and further. So the policies that they're calling for in terms of climate change and in terms of the need for new technological innovation, they're at complete cross purposes. There's environmental problems that are associated with use of electric cars too, because they use lithium batteries, and lithium mining is pretty destructive to the environment too. So that they want to reduce the whole debate between, oh, we're going to die because we're going to burn up by 2030, and that's really their whole pitch. They don't have the answer. That's what I'm trying to say. They're only using this in order to scaremonger against the people who are saying, well, look, the data keeps changing, the methodology of the data of collecting the data keeps changing, the models always seem to be off, and then they keep having to adjust the models, and then over and over again these climate scientists get caught manipulating the data.
See, one of my big things with that right there is just, like you said, if you're changing the data, so the data in and of itself is being updated and modified by different methodology, you're kind of comparing an apple to, like, I don't know, apple pie filling or something like that. It's in a slightly different form. The basis is the same. You're just trying to change how we're modeling it there. And to be fair to the climate change folks, I mean, a tenth of a degree in 11 or 12 years, I mean, that might not say much, but if you compare it to something like finance, I mean, that's 10% of a degree. And just if it's something that compounds and can accelerate over time, because I believe the big thing that I've seen, and again, I am no climate change expert whatsoever, but I believe there are three prevailing models. The first model shows, yes, over time, there's going to be incremental climate change. The next one does show incremental and then slowly increasing over time as well. And then the other one does show incremental, but within, I believe I forget, 50 or 100 years, you just start to see a massive rise. And I believe that's R3 or whatnot. My apologies if I'm getting it incorrect. But that is the model. The more extreme model is what a lot of folks are highlighting. And I mean, that is one of the models. Again, we don't know which one we're following, but they're looking at the potential worst case scenario. So I think what does a lot of more leftish folks a disservice is if they're taking data that they have gathered, and if they start to lightly, even if it's just a tiny bit, put their thumbs on it, and they start to manipulate it, you give the other side and your opponents the ability to criticize you for manipulating data. And this is one of the big things, and even I discussed this with the artist formerly known as Mrs. Memes, that I think one of the issues a lot of liberal folks have is, in general, compared to many folks on the right, they have terrible salespeople. That's the thing. But the thing is, I know there are people out there on the left, like my friend earlier, over a 6.5 minute discussion, he gave me an argument I had never heard, as well as informed me of a couple of other things that I wasn't aware of. And he did it in such a calm, coherent, concise way. So I know these people exist out there. It's just, I'm not hearing them within the general discourse. And that seems to be a problem. And that's why I like chatting with folks like you, because you tend to keep a much more level headed approach to things. You give credit where credit's due, but you're willing to criticize what you view as a bad idea, whether it's opinion or objective, wherever it comes from. And that is something I do think we need more of. But MC actually brings up a very good point in that nuclear power is a very strong, at least I feel, a stopgap in there. I mean, I say this as an individual that went to university at a place where we had a nuclear reactor there. It wasn't really actively providing power. I believe it was cobalt 65 or something there, and something non-heavily irradiating. But they explained it to us, and it basically a plane could crash into there, and again, it was very low level stuff. But there are certain safeguards. It's just we do have massive regulation, and I get it if you're going to be doing something like that, but it's a stopgap that you have many folks that are on the other side of the aisle are willing to support, and it's one of those complete on at all times, because whether it's solar or wind, until we get to the mass scale battery efficiency and storage capabilities, it's one of those things where it's not always on. Something like nuclear or coal or natural gas, those are instant on power supplies as well. You can have them on during the day and the night. So I acknowledge that climate change is important to so many people, but the arguments that we were using, it's kind of like you were saying, kind of the meme taken away is Democrats say in 12 years the earth will end if we don't do anything. And just for a reasonably prudent person, they're going to say, I don't think the earth's going to end. Yeah, we might be damaging Mother Earth, and that's not a good thing. And see, that's why I think that's a more wholesome message. It comes down to one of the smartest things I ever heard from a sales trainer, because I spent about a decade in and out of corporate sales, was everyone loves to buy, nobody likes to be sold. And that's the thing. If you try to force it down somebody's throat, people that may have been open to potentially giving input, feedback, or even contributing to you, or at least a discussion, they end up becoming your opposition because you're telling them to do something that they don't necessarily believe in. There's a difference between telling somebody they need to do something and asking them to do something, saying, listen, I think this is a major issue. Here are the reasons why. These are the things I think we should focus on. And you know what? Nuclear might not be popular among my constituents, but this is something that if we can do well, and don't tell me we can't do this. We are the United States of America. If anybody can do it well, we can. And see, I think that's just a more uplifting pitch that you can get folks from across the aisle and actually have bipartisan progress. Go on.
Right. I think I don't know if all the ideas about climate change prevention are really feasible, but definitely what MC was saying about nuclear power, it's the same thing that I would say too. I agree with him, because when I went to college, I went to engineering school, and of course we had a physics department that we spent a lot of time in. And one of the people that was a featured lecturer sometimes was a former NASA chief scientist for the Glenn Research Center, Woodrow Whitlow. And his specialty was dealing with radiation in outer space. But of course, he had applied knowledge in nuclear power generation. And he was saying that he's been at the forefront of campaigns to implement thorium reactors around the country as opposed to uranium nuclear power generation, because thorium is much more stable. It's a fusion process as opposed to a fissionable process. So a lot of the concerns that are attendant to nuclear power, from, of course, the 3 Mile Island disaster and Chernobyl and what was the name?
Worst case scenario is much less risky.
Yeah, the reason that uranium reactors were so on vogue for so many years was because of the Cold War, was because you could use them to create fuel or to create material for nuclear weapons, which today isn't as much of a priority, not as much as it was in the 1950s. So now you could create these nuclear reactors that would be almost so safe that you'd have to really screw up in order to endanger anyone, and they would solve almost all of this issue. And in fact, thorium, I believe, if I remember I mean, that this was about 7 years ago when I was in sophomore year of college. So thorium is actually more abundant in the Earth's crust than uranium is. So, in terms of cost, in terms of safety, it's just not even comparable. So
it isn't the issue that we have is we would have to do major modifications to existing power plants, and the newer power plants may even be more expensive than the standard uranium based, even if that's just because we haven't really implemented on scale conceptual designs for it yet.
From what he said, I think in France they've already implemented some of these, and that they are in fact cheaper to both maintain and to build. But obviously, first of all, there's labor cost differences between the U.S. and France, and then materials costs. I would say that the specifics have to be pursued, but if you don't put it forward as part of the agenda and do so, and there are reports out there about implementing this. There's probably cost proposals out there that we could go into. It doesn't really make great YouTube entertainment value because it's real nuanced in the weeds discussions about nuclear power, but people have been saying this. I think if he's still in the chat, Larry has been talking about this for a while to me because he used to be a nuclear sub serviceman. But the thing is, I think that these climate change people, the supporters, are not really they're not really looking to solve the issue. They're looking to promote their version of this apocalyptic crisis. So they're not. The solution isn't the emphasis. The problem is the emphasis.
Wait a second. So, and I see Larry in the chat here, and he's saying the only problem with thorium is economic, and he's saying the industry is uranium based and will require major retooling ground up. So it sounds like it's a lot of on the supply chain side. And especially if you have certain individuals that are in the business of selling uranium and they're not set up for selling thorium, you're asking a lot of the major industry players to do something that's not in their self-interest, which people tend to act in their own self-interest.
That's true, but I think in terms of building new, when it's not as if the current power plants are going to be sustainable the way they are forever. I mean, there's things that they do to in terms of maintenance and in terms of upgrades that they have to do all the time. So, yeah, we could continue to use uranium reactors. Uranium reactors aren't the worst thing in the world, despite the way that they're portrayed in the media. They're just more hazardous than the thorium alternative. But I would say any new nuclear power projects or plants that would be built, they should use thorium, or they should use, I'm not a specialist in this field, but they should use a fuel that's more fusionable as opposed to, a material that is that can be weaponized like uranium, because that it just isn't a priority anymore.
Well, let me actually, since we have Larry in the chat, he would probably know this better than either of us. But is there a potential for, I don't want to say hybrid reactors, but basically being able to run that power plant off of uranium and or thorium? Or is that just like, am I just wishing in one hand and doing what in the other?
Well, it's two different. The processes are two different processes, so you wouldn't be talking about the same type of reactor. So it's you can't pick one for the same. I guess
I'm just thinking about for the plumbing and the type of piping you'd have to use, seeing as they're two very different elements there. Even though if it's just that they're producing heat eventually to help turn water into steam and then power turbines. Again, like I'm not a nuclear engineer or anything, but I see it as the current best stopgap, because I do have some friends that have studied chemical engineering and stuff like that. And we have had drunken nights where we're just going along Wikipedia and I'm being shared information that mostly is more or less available publicly and everything. And basically the next generation solar panels, we're seeing increases of efficiency, but the major thing is the drastic reduction in cost. Like, there are conceptual designs right now that they have started to work on, and once they get the mass scale, we can literally print solar panels via printing presses. So they'll be much thinner. They'll be taking a lot less resources. And if they can maintain the same or even a higher level of efficiency for the fraction of cost, that, along with proper battery technology as well, that's how I think we can actually start to transition to more of the full green economy. I mean, you can argue that nuclear, when done the correct way, in and of itself, can be green as well. I realize we do still have waste products, and those are things that we do have to deal with. But if we can especially recycle those and continue to use them as long as we can within the reactors, we're maximizing our use of resources on Mother Earth. And I just think that's a good thing. I realize we've gone really sidetracked from the debate, so we should probably tool back over that.
Well, yeah. I did want to ask you before. How about? So I know, of course, you define yourself as a liberal Democrat. You're one of the few liberal Democrat people I know that's still willing to talk about politics with people like me. But through the debate, who do you think would be the people that you'd be willing to vote for the first two nights?
I mean, I like Tulsi and I like Mr. Yang. Those are two candidates that their message, even if I don't agree with them on everything, and even if I do think some of what they put out was pandering, I do like the generalized message. Maybe I'm biased because I do get a lot of my news through Tim Pool, and those are other candidates he does end up supporting. The mimetic taken away about Senator Sanders' whole revolution and basically taking on big special interests, I can appreciate that. He does start to go out there to a certain extent. It's just, my big thing is sometimes you just got to brush off vanity and show reality, brother. And it's like, as much as I would like to, dude, if I was the almighty or something and I could take care of every person on this planet, I would love to do this. I am no god nor prophet. All I know, man, is that if we are going to bring folks in here and we're going to help them out, that's perfectly fine. But if we're going to do that, we need to acknowledge that we're only going to have so many resources. So in order to do that and expand social programs, it's like we're a nation, and by the definition of a nation, we do have borders. And if we're going to have borders, we need to enforce our laws. And I do think we're seeing a lot of this immigration coming because President Trump is saying he's going to do something. So some of these folks may view this as their last chance to try to get to the land of opportunity. My question is, why do you have so many folks trekking thousands of miles with children to try to get here, while there are far too many of them that are literally dying along the journey here? What would make someone do that? And I've talked with individuals who, one of the individuals I used to work with about 10, 15 years ago, even back then, he had married a woman who had come over from Honduras. And even though they were married, for her to get her citizenship, to go through it the right way, it cost her thousands of dollars, whether it's in attorney fees, filing fees, the process to do it legitimately. It's one of those things we've been arguing and saying we need to upgrade our immigration system and do some form of immigration reform for so many years, and we've just only kind of just gone through the motions, if even, and we haven't done that. So it's like, if the president wants to put a recyclable border barrier down there, it's like, if that's something that President Clinton was saying, President Bush was saying, and President Obama was saying, dude, if it's going to end up being something that is that the absolute best use of money? I don't necessarily think so. But, if it could be a strategic reserve of steel, we could all of a sudden access if we really needed to. I mean, at this point, dude, there are people dying. We need to take away the incentive, and we need to actually set up a system that's going to work for folks, and especially work for the constituency in the United States. Because, yes, immigration can definitely be a plus, but it's just, we need to do it in a way that makes sense, because we only have so many resources, so we need to plan accordingly.
Yeah, I think it's something I can relate to. My family benefited from chain migration because my great uncle got here in the 40s from Ukraine, and then my uncle, my dad's brother, was sponsored by him after he already had his citizenship, and then my dad was sponsored by him too, and then my mom married my dad to get her citizenship. So but all of it was done by legal means, and the fact is they hated each other, so they had to go through that marriage and everything. So it was like pretty. I think the standards are just getting lowered over and over, and I think he's also right to try to stem the issues of chain migration and what do you call it, anchor babies, birthright citizenship. Those are issues that are aggravating the whole crisis because these people know that they can come here, they can have a child here, they can get their citizenship. So how about this? I do have the list of all of the candidates, and you want to run through them, and you can give your impression, and maybe I'll give mine.
Yeah, sure.
So we have the first guy on this list from Quartz is John Delaney. So what do you think of?
All right, let me. And again, I'm going to have to bring up the list just because at least a good portion of it I simply listened to it. So there were some individuals like
so yeah, let me send it
Booker.
to you in the chat so that we're looking off the same order. So
MC's going to rip me a new one. Memes. Oh, of course you didn't know what all these candidates said. You don't know their full life stories and everything. My apologies, MC. I'll try to do better next time. So let's see what we got here. Show messages. Boom. All right. So we got it here. All right. So
in the meantime, Stormy Daniels is saying that she used to be a sailor on the guided missile destroyer USS Callahan. Isn't it rare that a fine lass like yourself, a porn star, nonetheless, was a service woman on the USS Callahan? Isn't that pretty unusual, memes?
Oh, we have Miss Davis in the chat. That's
yeah.
Stormy. Are we sure? Now, the only reason I say this is because it's the internet, and the middle name there makes me think that we may be getting trolled. Again, I do not know this. But
Stormy, yeah. Please give some indication that you are the authentic Stormy Daniels, perhaps through some sort of symbology. So we'll await her response. But yeah, I'm ready if you are.
Okay, so we got a lull. Okay, so Mr. Delaney. Okay, I recognize this gentleman. So he was in the first debate. I remember because I saw him like, who the heck is this guy? He looked a little bit like if Red Foreman was the principal of your high school. So that's what I kind of took away. But I do remember he did differentiate himself. So
yeah, Bill Maher called him the principal too.
I probably got it from somewhere over there. So basically, he was the dude that was willing to reach across the aisle and saying, yeah, there are a lot of folks that may have supported President Trump that are willing to come back. Again, that doesn't seem to be popular among a lot of the Democratic base, and this is just a continued mantra that I hear. Oh, hey, kitty. But dude, all I know, man, is what I took away from him is he was differentiating himself. He looked to be at least strong in what he believed. Do I remember absolutely everything he said? Oh, absolutely hell not. But I think part of that is because he didn't seem to get a huge amount of actual coverage time there. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, first, Stormy has responded by giving us the crabs, so I don't know if that's enough authentication for you if you look at the chat.
Oh, wait. No, could it actually be somebody related to Elizabeth Warren? Because I remember there was a crab-based omelet in Pow Wow Chow.
Yeah, I mean,
I think we are getting.
It could
trolled.
Be a double deception and mistaken identity. It's true.
This is absolutely a possibility. So, as far as Mr. Delaney goes, what are your thoughts, man?
Yeah, I thought that he tried his best. It was like really, I think he did what he had to do to get some attention. The fact is, though, that the real problem with people who say, well, I'm going to reach across the aisle is that it's not popular among either the Democratic base or among many people who are disaffected. Some of the people who are Bernie people, because they perceive the real corruption in the Democratic Party being, something that has developed from cooperating too much with the Republicans. So,
Mm.
I think it's a perspective that is still, it's a valid perspective, but I don't think it's going to work, and I don't think he's going to make any progress.
You don't think he had that oomph for staying power?
No, he's definitely. First of all, there's other people like Hickenlooper who can pull off the same shtick, and like you said, he has that principal look, and I don't think he's really good. It's not for lack of effort because he's been campaigning since 2017. But
Mm.
what are you going to do? He's if that's how much progress he's made up until now, I don't think it's going to work. So the next candidate is Andrew Yang. What did you think about him on Thursday night?
I loved his initial statements. Again, I think that was his strongest point there. Uh, as far as his views on immigration and what else he was doing, I mean, again, that did seem to me to be a bit of pandering. Aside from the whole Mike Gates situation with him and Miss Williamson, um, I mean, again, I would like to hear what may have actually happened. MC actually did bring up a good point, how it very well could have been the sheer fact that during the debate they were adjusting mics and testing them out. So rather than testing them out on someone like a Vice President Biden or Senator Sanders, two of the main front runners, they decided to do two of the lesser known candidates, which to God, I hope they were just testing it. And to be fair, there actually were mic issues the night before, because we remember the former anchors that were moderating the debate. Their mics were still on, so they had to do a full commercial break to figure that stuff out. So there was a history of audio issues. So we do have to be fair to NBC on that front. That's not to say that we shouldn't be skeptical on the reasons given, but as far as that goes, one of the things I think a lot of folks miss is that while he's explaining his numbers, yes, the freedom dividend is currently valued at approximately $3 trillion per year for all American citizens over the age of 18. And what I think a lot of folks miss is he's talking about completely transforming the United States economy by implementing a VAT tax, something that Europe has used for a number of years. There are some positive things about a VAT tax as far as revenue collection goes, in that it's a lot harder to avoid than our tax system here. However, my main concern is if you were to implement a value added tax to the U.S. economy, I fear that would drain a lot of investment incentive, because so many folks from all over the world put money into the United States because we provide often a very high rate of return per dollar invested. And yes, a lot of this is from very wealthy people. However, much of that innovation, such as like a Steve Jobs creating the iPhone, yes, it is helping us level up our technology. It's providing technology to the masses from after such innovations and via other competition and iterations of smartphones and everything. I mean, at this point in the social media era, you can argue that maybe isn't necessarily the most positive things, but he is asking to radically redesign the economy. And there are pros for that, but there are definitely cons against it as well, because the value added tax, that's something that to try to do something like that, even if he were to be elected, I'm unsure if he could actually accomplish that, because it is out there. Not necessarily saying it's the worst idea, but again, it is a radical change. So what are your thoughts on Mr. Yang?
Yeah, I think after his first debate. Now, this was before I knew about the Mike incident, but I don't think it changes my impression. My stock in Andrew Yang really, really dropped, partly because he cited the first national security threat was Russia, and I think that that's a complete and total pander to the Democratic establishment. I think anyone who is willing to use Russia as their focus for scaremongering is a clear and present danger to the U.S. Now, there's obviously people who are much, much more egregiously guilty of that than him, and one of them was on stage, Eric Swalwell. But I think that really that's what I took away from it. Other issues that I saw with him was that he really did, in terms of his personal performance, and this could have been related to the Mike issue. He seemed like he was flustered by the stage, and he may have not thought that he was of the same stature as some of the people who were more established. He was standing there pretty close to Vice President Biden, but the thing with him is it's beyond whether you agree with him or not, because I don't believe in the UBI. I think the UBI proposal is a red herring, because once you push that through, that's all well and good, but you would have to have, first of all, a majority in the House and a 60 vote majority in the Senate to pass that, and that would establish the new benefit, and then probably the agency to disburse it. But this is the key. So that's already hard enough. The second issue, and I went into it a couple days ago on one of my uploads, was that his whole proposal hinges on his idea that this would have to replace the other welfare benefits. And if you know anything about the Democratic Party, they would be completely opposed to repealing any of those benefits, whether it's S-chip or SNAP or or any of these Medicaid or Medicare expansions, any of them, any benefits that they believe is entitlement till the end of time. They think that those are things that the American people were given as part of the quote unquote safety nets. So his whole proposal would be at the mercy of the party that is most committed to keeping them going. Similar to the way that Donald Trump is battling the deep state in the foreign policy arena, the Democrats are, they're beholden to the deep state in the domestic policy arena. So, any cut to that would involve A, cutting benefits to their own base, B, cutting the jobs in the agencies that are sustaining them, and a lot of those people are Democratic voters or movers and shakers themselves. So I don't think Andrew Yang is proposing anything that could ever seriously go forward in whether it's implementing UBI or repealing those benefits.
Oh, that's one of those things. I mean, how you would actually go about implementing it, you would have to write very careful legislation. I mean, conceptually, I get what he's saying, but then again, you are talking about adding what is a over $3 trillion entitlement to the budget that you do have to pay for. So, did you want to move on to Julian Castro?
Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So Mr. Castro here, he was one of our individuals who did speak in Espanol for several of the questions, partially as well. That whole thing, that realistically, that really didn't bother me as much as it did other people. It's like, all right, you're reaching out to Latino voters. I still remember when President Bush would throw in a couple of lines of Spanish here or there. There was, at least on that first night there, an individual, I believe, one of the Univision anchors there. So if it's also being broadcast on Univision as well, is it the most out of place thing? I don't really think so. But moving along, I think one of the big things is many people, they're kind of like, they're unaware of him. He's kind of a fresh face there. And I don't think he really hurt himself. Is he an individual that maybe was at least hinting at identity politics and stuff? Absolutely. But he was it the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, I believe, under President Obama. So he held the same position that Ben Carson currently holds as well. It says basically his mother was heavily involved in activism. He's kind of pitching that as just kind of part of his narrative. Yeah, I mean, he's served in politics. He kind of reminds me of almost kind of a leftish Marco Rubio in a way. He seems to be very certain things like free trade. He kind of follows there. So you could say that's a very stereotypical traditional Democrat in a way, but I believe it says as far as, was he one of the individuals that was kind of like, he was kind of hinting at open borders or stuff, or getting rid of.
He was the person with the most defined idea of how it would happen, because he was talking about the specific statute he would repeal.
Okay, all right, no. So it's something he's looking into, whether you support the guy or not. I remember he was getting a lot of internet traction after that. I believe he's seen a spike in donations after his performance there. Again, whether you like the guy or not, it sounds like he's doing something of what he has to do to at least get some attention on himself. He said he's pledged to not take a dime from political action committees. Apparently, they don't really have any records of any of that. But I mean, that seems like a noble cause, I'd say, or at least there. But then again, he's not saying he's not going to take any corporate donations as well. So, I don't know. Maybe it's a little too early to see if that's actually going to play out. If that makes an idea. But again, he's focusing on all those free trade deals. So he's one of those individuals that I don't know. Is he differentiating himself from President Trump to actually be feasible, or would he be a good counter to President Trump because he's not that much different? And his big thing is he supports many of the same things, but he's not President Trump. I don't know. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I would say that Julian Castro, like you said, he's more open about what his real intentions are. And he was, it's not just the open borders. He was also one of the first candidates to say that there's a real goal to pursue with reparations. And he was very open. And he didn't make as much of a clown out of himself as other people. That's the thing that you have to give him credit for. He doesn't go and look like obviously out of his depth when he's talking about something, but the ideas themselves are bad. That's just what I'm going to say. Open borders is an idea that would wreck the country's labor market and probably cause social chaos here, because we're not just talking about people from Latin America. There's people who are coming from the rest of the world. All they would have to do, let's say a lot of people from the Philippines want to get into the U.S. All they have to do is book a flight to Mexico and then just hop up to the border, or even, I mean, think about it, Memes, you live up in the Northeast. People could just start coming in through the Canadian border, which is not going to have a wall. So people could hop a flight to Vancouver or to, in your case, the Montreal metro area, and then, get onto a bus or charter a bus, take it over to the border, start to come in that way. And under Castro's ideas, they wouldn't really face any penalty. So it's a horrible idea. In terms of the reparations, he was really, I think, trying to embrace the topic, but like a lot of other people, he doesn't have a good idea of how he would do it, and therefore, I don't think that he would connect to people in my part of the country at all. I think he'd probably do very poorly over here, and most of his support would probably be in the Southwest. This isn't he's, again, when you compare him to the other idiots that were on the stage, he seems pretty good, except for the part where he said that transsexuals should have abortion rights. But, that was pretty freaky, but it was kind of a blip on the radar.
Was it him, or for some reason I thought, why did I attribute that to Beto?
No, that was him. That wasn't Beto.
Okay.
I mean, it could be that Beto's doing so bad that people automatically associate stupid things that other people say to Beto because it seems like something he would say.
Well, again, both Beto, him, and Senator Booker, unfortunately, their voices, when I was listening while I was kind of doing other things at work. I definitely confuzzled them. That's why probably watching it would give me a little bit more of an insight as well. That's on me. But I mean, again, he was, I believe, the second or third candidate with some of his opening remarks, I believe. He also spoke in Spanish. And for him, I mean, again, did it really seem out of character at all? I mean, not really, because I believe I don't know if English or Spanish was his first language, but I believe he is fluent in both of them. So,
right.
Did you want to move on to Miss Kamala Harris?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we have Miss Kamala Harris. I mean, I personally think she had a strong showing in the debates because, I mean, she was one of the first ones to go out there and just go after Vice President Biden for a number of things. You can argue over the exact accuracy of some things, as I know MC has pointed out a couple of times. Again, I really haven't followed her that heavily. I know she is very popular. I believe she is one of the candidates as well that has proposed the thoughts of reparations as well. So that definitely is something that's being discussed in our public discourse. Um, so as far as what's she talking about? Her biggest idea for the economy, she's talking about the LIFT Act, which, according to this article, is a working and middle class tax cut akin to the earned income tax credit that she says will provide up to $500 a month to families. In order to pay for this, she wants to reverse Trump's 2017 tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy, but it's not clear she'll be able to tackle the radical structural changes that the bill made in how the U.S. multinationals operate. It's like, okay, so in order to do that, you would need to also repeal other legislation. So, I mean, again, she has ideas. She does seem to at least come off as a fairly establishment, but do I say the word progressive, or she's supporting certain things that typically haven't really been in the general Democratic wheelhouse of major pushes more recently? If elected, she would actually be the first president of the United States. She is a woman of color as well. I believe it does say she's also biracial as well. I mean, again, these are certain identity things that could be a positive thing. As far as how it is played, unfortunately, we just seem to devolve into purity spirals. That's why I think that's not the greatest of roads to go down. I don't know. It's I thought she had a strong debate performance. Personally, do I necessarily agree with her on everything? Not at all. So, what are your thoughts, Bold?
Well, so Kamala Harris, I think if you're talking about just the debate performance, it's pretty obvious that she strategically knocked it out of the park, because the key for most of these candidates was to, climb on top of the shoulders of the front runner, and that was Biden. And she basically drew a stark contrast between, and it's already a stark contrast because look at them, just the age and the race and their personal, their personalities is so different. But I think that she slayed the dragon with that whole debate about the busing situation. The fact of the matter is, though, that if people really looked into the issue, whether Biden was correct. Okay, busing was a horrible policy, and people, entire cities. I mean, you're from Massachusetts, right? So I've read accounts of the busing crisis in Massachusetts, and it tore the fabric of the city apart. And I know that it's not as if people were really. I mean, there was a huge element of racism into why people opposed busing, but a lot of people were simply saying, look, we don't want our kids to be taking 2-hour bus rides to the other side of the city just in order to go to school with people who look otherwise. We want our people to go to the same neighborhood schools that we went to and be alumni of the same high schools we went to, and to keep on, and to keep our neighborhoods intact. And that's what kind of helped to trigger the white flight of the 1970s and 80s, where people would say, well, this urban school district is integrating, and we're going to have to, have our kids go to school all across town. So we're going to move over to, in New York's case, to Long Island or wherever it was. And I think the intention behind it was so blind to the real way that people live, and the people who implemented it were so they were so detached from the real issues, because a lot of them sent their kids to either private schools, or they didn't have kids or whatever. So if people really looked into it, Kamala Harris was wrong on the issue, but she was right in the tactics, because President Biden was not, or Vice President Biden, sorry. Haven't we both called him President Biden today?
Maybe I think I made President Sanders.
So yeah, let me just make it clear to the chat.
Maybe a Freudian slip. I don't know.
Yeah, neither me nor Memes is nominating Joe Biden, but it's a slip of the tongue. So the fact is that Biden was I believe, correct on the issue, but he was incompetent at explaining why. And people today, audiences today, don't remember the busing issue because many of us, I went to integrated schools when I went to public school. Um, it's not really an issue that we're familiar with today because it's not been adequately explained and explained with proper deference to the people that were going through it, because there were entire families of Irish Catholic people over in South Boston, for example, that were they they were really like, I mean, these were hardcore, not even demonstrations, they were riots in order to prevent their kids from being bused all the way across town. So what Kamala Harris was doing was, I think, exploiting a very complicated issue and using it to take down Joe Biden. And you know what? Good for her for knowing how to play good politics, even if it's the wrong idea. But in terms of, my personal impression of her, she would have to be among the least favorite candidates of any of them that are running. It would probably be her, Eric Swalwell, and you could probably say, Booker and Warren. Those are like those people are, if they got elected president, I would probably be, digging some sort of bunker out in Wyoming or something.
I mean, I'm not sure I would agree with that statement. I don't think it would necessarily be that bad. See, I think Senator Warren, she's a big policy wonk. I did vote for her last time around to be my representative senator, but to vote for someone to be your representative senator and president of the United States, those are two different jobs. So, I mean, I may be more hesitant. I'm unsure of her leadership skills. Yeah. So, so next up, we have Marianne Williamson. So she was the best-selling author of 12 books, including The Healing Soul of America. She ran for the U.S. Representative of California in 2014 as an independent. She said she was also considering running for president back in November of last year. So apparently one of her big things is she's a spiritual advisor to Oprah Winfrey. She's an active supporter of the HIV/AIDS community, poverty reduction, female empowerment. So basically some of her big things were basically upwards of $10 billion of slavery and for reparations every year for 10 years to the African-American community. And I've heard her referred to as, quote unquote, the crazy hippie lady, that apparently there are a number of folks that are trying to support her, including Mr. Poole said he donated a little bit of money to her just to get her on the debate stage, because she does have a very positive message of healing. You can argue the feasibility all day long. Fair enough. But the sheer fact she's putting out a very positive peace and love mimetic, and she apparently likes referring to crystals, which I do like crystals. So, I mean, I am probably a little biased here. I do think it's a good counter to bring back to at least the mimetic that many of us used to take away from a lot of folks on the left. Just the whole peace and love, and why can't we all just get along? I know MC is probably savaging me right now, but I'm just going to continue on in that I like that message. And you know what? I may actually throw her a couple bucks. I don't know. Just even if we are using that as the standard for keeping people in the debate stage, the number of donations, I mean, if money is speech in certain circumstances, at this point, it's like having a good counter. And that's one of the things that bothered me about like the last CNN debate between Secretary Clinton and Mr. Trump last time, because their threshold, I believe, before the debate was 15%. That last debate, I believe, Mr. Gary Johnson was exactly at the threshold, but he was not brought in. And that's one of the things that bothers me, because at least if you have some other voices, you're not just strictly doing the I'm going to launch, play to my base on this side. It's another factor. So if we can at least trend the Democrats into maybe we should think about people, maybe we should try to do some realistic things. Again, you can disagree with her on her other policies, and maybe I'm just adding some of the things that I want there. I did enjoy hearing some of that more positive message. So, Bold, your thoughts?
Well, so I think that Marianne Williamson, like a lot of people have said, has stolen the show. Amazing Lucas had like a very good video about the debate overall, and he did point out that she said one of the more perceptive things, which is that you can have all the plans you want, but Donald Trump didn't win the election because he had a plan, but because he had a slogan which was "Make America Great Again," and I'm paraphrasing obviously, but she does have the moxie to break through that whole politician versus voter distrust barrier. But I kind of see her as a scam artist, but maybe that's what makes her perfect to run for president.
She's also highly memeable.
Right. And look, like you and Tim Pool, I think that this is a good thing to have in the race. Because this is not what you guys said, but because I think that she embarrasses the other candidates because they don't want to be seen near her because she's kind of she's like your auntie that lived over in the hippie commune back in the 70s and may have gone through some addictions to various hallucinogens or whatever, or been part of a cult, or been a leader of a cult, which is what people are alleging. But she definitely is talking about things that are going directly to the voters. That she speaks to the heart. Okay, a lot of these people are speaking to people's guilt, and I don't think she's doing that necessarily, except for the reparations nonsense. So yeah, I think she had a good night. I mean, what else can you say? I'm not really expecting to look, if she was an actual elected representative, I would probably be more harsh on her because she really was kind of ridiculous with the Pat Benatar thing. I will win with love and I will meet you on the battlefield and whatever, and heartache to heartache. I don't know if you saw that video where they mashed it up with the Love is the Battlefield song by Pat Benatar, but it was pretty funny.
Well, that happened with candidate Trump too. That's the thing; it was memeable.
Yeah,
and President Trump was definitely assisted by the greater internet memetic market, just because it's so easy to do. Because he would say just such out there things and just such quick little sound bites. And that's something that Miss Williams, I really think she hit on, because she was basically saying you can have all the policy you want, but she basically said Donald Trump became president of the United States via a memetic. Just a saying, "Make America Great Again," that was easily memeable.
All right, so I guess the next one is Cory Spartacus Booker.
Did you want me to start off on this, or did you want to?
Yeah,
okay, so Mr. Booker, the former Newark, New Jersey mayor, he launched his appeal with America's Common Purpose. He's also been a stringent Trump denouncer as well. He did have his "I am Spartacus" moment that I don't see. I heard that. I heard the audio again. Did we have any other members stand up becoming Spartacus? Because I do remember that from the movie. I don't believe anyone else did. So I don't know. All I know is, what's he talking about here? So his biggest idea for the economy, according to our little Quartz article here, is a baby bond program that would give every U.S. child a treasury bond at birth with a larger amount for poorer kids. He would also propose a guaranteed $15 an hour minimum wage in 15 test areas. Okay, that as a policy is actually very interesting there, because a lot of times we do hear individuals such as Senator Sanders saying we need to do a $15 an hour minimum wage across the entire country. Don't get me wrong, I would absolutely that would be great as far as a worker there if you were able to secure said job. However, man, dude, I did study business and just in economics and just what I'm viewing around it. It's like, dude, the McDonald's down the street from me, it has kiosks. Like, I went to a McDonald's even up in New Hampshire the other day to grab some food, and I saw a couple of folks ordering at kiosks, and I walked up to the counter, and eventually a lady came up and did assist me with my order, because I mean, I generally try to deal with people if I can. But at this point, it's like, if you just start spiking wages, I fear for it could work in some parts of the country, like in Boston. Maybe you'd be able to get away with in some areas just because the cost of everything in Boston is very expensive. But if you're talking about places in the Midwest, in the South, just areas that maybe the only main employer around there is a factory. If all of a sudden you're going to increase somebody from whatever it is now, like 8 to 25, $9 an hour, if you're going to have a 60 to 70+% increase, okay. I mean, it's just my fear is people losing jobs, and it's just to do something like that. However, doing a trial does seem like a bit more of a pragmatic approach. I mean, I do like his general attitude. I just think he tries too hard at times, just kind of trying to make that moment. And I believe he was the first individual in the debate that started speaking in Espanol.
Oh no, it wasn't him.
Oh
That
no,
was
no, it was
the
Beto. It was Beto. And again,
yeah.
like I confused their voices. I just know what that he did there. I mean, see, I'm a little biased because I like Cory Booker because before he really got into the Senate and national politics, him and Chris Christie did a little video, and Cory Booker would do something, and you'd have Chris Christie there, and he'd be like, Booker, and they turned it into like a little skit, and it reminded me of like our St. Patrick's Day events that our politicians will do up here. And what they'll do is they'll be down there in City Hall, and they'll literally be roasting each other in a good-natured way. And that's something that I think we do need more in politics that we've kind of lost, that good-natured approach. Would he be able to continue a good-natured mimetic through it? I don't know, man. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Mr. Spartacus?
All right, so Cory Booker, I would say, is he's definitely jumped the shark. I don't know why he's running for president, and I think that the debate I think it was on the first debate, right? He was on Wednesday night, so it would show just how desperate he was to get into this whole pandering to the Hispanics, because when you saw Beto from the start, when Jose Diaz-Balart he asked the question, and I think it was about, maybe it wasn't even him, but he asked a question about income tax, and Beto immediately spoke about voting issues and gerrymandering in Spanish. So you could see on Booker's face, he was like crestfallen because he wanted to be the first person to pander in Spanish. And you could see Elizabeth Warren in the middle. She was kind of like aghast at the whole situation. So that was the funniest meme from the night. And I think that in general, during the debate, you could see that, Cory Booker, when he ran for Senate, he was, of course, building upon what he wanted people to think was a success in Newark. But in reality, his time as Newark mayor was really, just a different type of the same garbage. Before that, there was another mayor who was simply a machine politician, Sharpe James. And Booker was a little less of a machine politician, but more of an attention hog. And they got a donation of $100 million from Zuckerberg to revamp the school district, and it was all basically wasted on administrative costs. So, as far as the debate went, I don't think it went well at all. I think his attempt to pander in Spanish was ridiculous because the sentence. I've had multiple. I speak Spanish, but I'm not a native speaker. But native speakers I do know were saying that they thought he was speaking Vietnamese or something, and it was really an embarrassment that he would go and try to do the same thing even after Beto already did it. And
that's the thing, because I think a couple of them maybe wanted to do that, but then all of a sudden he did it, and Mr. Castro, he seemed to be more fluid in that. The other folks kind of, I'm not sure if they necessarily did themselves a huge service.
Yeah, so I think that's all I have to say about Booker, aside from the fact that his baby bond idea is the real issue is that he originally was going to run as just a standard Democrat, but because the reparations community, they're called the ADOS community. I don't know if you've heard of them, American Descendants of Slaves. So they were pressuring him really hard and like going around and kind of getting in his face whenever he would do an appearance. So he adopted one of their ideas, which is the baby bond, which is proposed by Professor Sandy Darity at Duke. So is that a new idea that some people would like? Obviously, yes, because there's a grassroots movement behind it. But most people are probably not going to pay attention to that. And in fact, it's saying here that it would be for every child, not just the children of ADOS. So I think they would be very pissed off if they were to find that out. And I think many of them are already calling him out on that.
I gotcha. So if we're going to jump right along to Representative Tulsi Gabbard, I personally like Tulsi, no MC. It's not just because she's riding a surfboard in a bikini or anything. And no, I haven't watched that video yet. Maybe I will after this. But no, she's very strong anti-war. She has served in the U.S. Air Force as well. I believe she's still in the Air Guard. Yeah, no, she speaks very calmly. She's very reserved. Again, I think she personally, if she could be more assertive, I would really like to see that. I think there were certain opportunities that she could have taken that maybe she didn't because just whether it was out of respect or whatnot. She was a strong proponent of Senator Sanders the last time around, so she is differentiated. She has spoken out against a lot of things that many of her peers do support. So I do think she did help establish herself and at least do enough to continue on. So as more and more candidates drop off, maybe she can truly differentiate herself. And I do see a lot of folks on the left going after her, throwing a lot of ad homs. So I don't know. You usually only take flack when you're over the target. So what are your thoughts, Bold?
Well, yeah, I think we've discussed her a lot already, and I generally agree with almost everything you're talking about. I'll say that I think she wouldn't be a good candidate for president because she's not really she doesn't have much experience as an administrator, but she's definitely got the courage of a real person who's trying to affect change, not just be part of the leadership. So I would say she'd be better suited to be in a position such as Secretary of State or possibly run for the Senate or be in another position that affects policy, maybe National Security Advisor. A lot of people who are hardcore conservatives, the Pat Buchanan type, have proposed that she replace John Bolton, which I wouldn't have a problem with personally, but I don't know if it would really be realistic for that to happen due to the climate that we're in. But yeah, I do like Tulsi Gabbard, and I see people like MC talking about, oh, you're just into her because of she's hot as hell or whatever. Look, there's a lot of politicians that are what's her name AOC in some photos is like really hot, but we don't propose that she should run for president. Or the fact is that I think that some of these candidates are able to come out as real people of principle, and this is one of them. And then other people, they just seem completely fake. And I think her authenticity is also a flaw because she doesn't try to market herself really. She's just saying, when she interjected with Tim Ryan, a lot of people would have said, hey, she's being a bitch to him. She's speaking out of turn or whatever. I don't think she cared. I think she just wanted to say her piece and move on. So let me see here. So the next one is Pocahontas. So your turn.
All right. So my home state that is not a state because we are Commonwealth Senator Elizabeth Warren. I like Liz in that she said she was going to go about and actually do a certain level of financial reform. She said she was going to do something. She did it. You can argue about the results. I mean, again, companies will always shift things around the way they bill people and charge people depending on what you do and everything. But she was actually fighting hard. And even when she was replacing, at that time, Senator Scott Brown, who I had voted for the first time, I voted for him the second time. He ended up losing. Senator Warren became the candidate, and actually one of my more progressive friends that I used to play Dungeons and Dragons with. He actually went on to former Senator, or at that time, no longer Senator-elect Scott Brown, wished him well, but said that Elizabeth Warren was a very strong progressive candidate that he supported. He then immediately was flamed down by Scott Brown supporters, apparently. But as far as Liz Warren goes, my big thing, the whole quote-unquote Pocahontas thing, dude, I was told the same thing. I'll be straight up. There was a point in my life, probably about 10 years ago or so, that I had always heard kind of the rumors, but I was told that my grandfather on my mother's side was like half Abenaki or something like that. And it's like, oh yeah, we're Native American.
Mhm.
So I was told the same thing. It's fairly common around here. To be fair, I believe she did grow up initially in Oklahoma.
Yep.
But as an individual who had a relative troll the family, and yeah, I'm a pretty pale guy and stuff, so it's like, yeah, it's like, do I look Native American? No, not really. But when I get some sun and stuff, I do gain more melanin in my skin after I have my initial burn. And some of my cousins, they do have a much deeper olive tone. So that's one of those things where it's like, I could see that as feasible. So that's something there. I have filled out forms before when I had the option. I would check basically all the boxes that would apply and stuff. And it made me feel unique. Upon further investigation, my grandmother says, oh, she's like, no, your grandfather was just trolling you. I'm like, oh, thank you, Nana. That makes sense. All right, I can accept that. But again, I'm unsure for the presidency. A lot of more centrist folks are coming around. I do think she had a pretty strong format because she can be very long-winded at times. So, and again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just her nature of basically being more professorial. So I do like Liz. I was actually very impressed that she had, coming from a very progressive state, or excuse me, Commonwealth like Massachusetts, she's a very strong supporter of progressive values per se. And my big thing is, if more and more folks come around, it's, if she did get to be elected president of the United States, I think there might be a lot more folks, especially certain parts of the left, that would be more okay with that. Because, I mean, the thing is with Secretary Clinton, we knew who Hillary Clinton was for the past 20 plus years. And unfortunately, it kind of goes back to the Harvey Dent thing. It's like, you either die a hero, you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Mhm.
Again, you can argue over everything what you want, but I think she could do it. I'm unsure how she could go about defeating Donald Trump, though. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the best matchup. So what are your thoughts on Miss Warren?
So I have like a very strong aversion to Elizabeth Warren. But yeah, I'll talk about the debate performance. The problem with the debate, so I don't think she did bad in the debate, but I do think that the moderators were favoring her. One second, let me just type something to Dave McDowell here. 1 second.
See, my big thing is,
So,
after she ended up
sorry
doing
about
that DNA test, the thing is, when she came out, no, I just started trying to fill in a little dead air. But the thing is, as soon as she came out with a campaign commercial saying, yes, I am part this, even though it wasn't based on any actual United States Native American database, and you're just going to go on Mesoamerican, you could be as maybe 1,028th, to use that as a potential message, that just seemed like, that's literally, I'm face palming. I'm like, Liz, just stick with what you said and be like, hey, this is what I was told. My mom had a cookbook of this thing and stuff. This is what I was told. I was duped. I get it. I look in the mirror. I can acknowledge reality. I'm just basing on what I was said. And I have heard other people say that. So I'm sorry, go on.
So yeah, the thing is, it's not only the Native American issue. The issue is that I would say Elizabeth Warren, she does go out there and like you said, in a professorial manner, she portrays herself as this paragon of, virtue and all of that. but she's not. And the fact and that episode is a good indicator. But the other issue is that, and this is why Dr. Shiva really resonated with me, and I wish that he would run in this state, because we have two bad senators, one Republican and one Democrat, that they are simply getting reelected almost automatically. Um, the real problem is that Elizabeth Warren, in that case, is part of the academic industrial complex. And she's just so obsessed with, trying to portray America as this unequal, horrible place where, workers have virtually no rights, when she spent her entire career, not only in law, but as a legal professor. And if you talk, I don't know what your training is, because we haven't really talked that much, but the lawyers that I've talked to, and I know a few, say that law professors really don't know the world of law in practice. So, yeah, she's a good professor, and apparently her students like her. But if you're talking about how the real world works, you don't learn it from Harvard School of Law. You have to go through your internship and go through several years as a junior associate, and then maybe a partner, and work your way up, and become, and of course it's not, being a lawyer in America isn't about doing the right thing. It's about doing the right thing for the firm and doing the right thing for you. So she's completely detached, not only from reality for most Americans, but from most people in her own profession. And I think that she's not unique it's the same thing with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, by the way. She's also the same type of person. The only difference is that Schultz went into politics much, much earlier, and Warren waited a very long time. But when she's proposing things like this asset tax on people who have, they're mega millionaires or above, I think that people like the sound of it until they actually have it applied to them, or applied in a way that affects them. So when she, excuse me, when obviously you've probably heard about the CFPB, which was her main proposal back when she was starting out in politics, right?
Which
The Consumer Financial Protection.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that
So-
was the reform. Yeah.
So I know people who were specifically affected by it, because the CFPB was meant to target predatory lenders, and predatory lenders, they don't necessarily just they don't come to your house and they say, hey, give us your fucking money or we'll take your shit. What they'll do is they'll hire a law firm, and the law firm will they'll handle the collections process, which is something that law firms do, because you want it to be a legal process. So the CFPB was harassing this law firm of a person that I know, and going after them for years and years, trying to say, well, the process is unfair, and you don't have actual real lawyers that are performing the actual collection, or you're not having actual lawyers go through all of the collection statements. And eventually the whole case went to her lackey, who ran for governor here afterward. His name is Richard Cordray. He was the one who initiated this prosecution against this law firm. And they didn't even have a basis for the case, because everything was legal, everything was above board. And when it went to, I think, the Ohio Supreme Court here, the judge basically laughed the case out of court and ordered the CFPB to pay damages to the firm. And it was a huge humiliation for the CFPB. And and the other thing people don't know, so she said it's called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That's what she founded. When when the CFPB prosecutes a case against a payday lender, or one of these other institutions that they're predatory to the consumer, where do you think that the money goes?
I think I remember somebody describing a certain. Would you say it's a loop, or am I just mischaracterizing it?
No, the money just goes to the CFPB. It doesn't go back to the consumer. So yeah, the payday lender gets fired, or not fired, but they get fined like the damages or whatever, but the money doesn't go back to the people that were victimized. The money goes back to the CFPB, or it goes back to the Treasury, the government essentially. So you're not really helping the consumer. All you're doing is punishing the payday lender, which, if that's your goal, that's fine. But that's really the issue. I don't think that they really have the consumer necessarily in mind. I think what they really have in mind is trying to regulate commercial behavior. And, payday lenders, I don't recommend people go and use them. A lot of the people who do it, they do it because they have horrible credit, or they're desperate or something like that. But I don't think the CFPB is really address anything. And I think if she's calling that an accomplishment, then most people who have been affected by it would probably, they'd be up in arms if she was to become the nominee. I don't know if it's a huge amount of people, but that's my impression of her. And, as far as the Pocahontas thing, I think that kind of masks some of the other issues that people should have with her. She was part of that whole cabal of people that was trying to say, oh, we should prosecute, or we should disqualify Brett Kavanaugh based on an accusation of somebody who hasn't seen him in 30 years, if not longer. She was one of the people who called for Trump's impeachment, even based on lack of evidence and a hint of obstruction of justice that was in a report that didn't recommend for prosecution. So I think Elizabeth Warren, just like Kamala Harris, is in the basket of people who I would say, no, I'm not going to vote for them, doesn't matter what.
Well, speaking of Brett Kavanaugh, next up we got Amy Klobuchar, who apparently, during his confirmation hearings, thoroughly was grilling the judge, and that helped establish her as a quote-unquote farther left Democrat, or ingratiated her there. I do remember watching when she was giving her campaign announcement. She was in the middle of a snowstorm, perhaps even a blizzard there. And to be fair, I did like some of her message. She did utilize the saying of e pluribus unum, like of many, there's one, which is something that even President Obama used in his historic DNC speech, where I remember being like, can I vote for this guy? Like, I know John Kerry's our nominee, but like, I wanted to vote for him at that point. But I digress. She's also, as we've heard, apparently eating salad from a comb, I believe. To me, if anything, that shows that she's pragmatic, because I likely.
Yeah, I didn't see a problem with that. I don't know. I thought it was
an ad hom.
Yeah, I thought that. I mean, is there something wrong with me because I don't care? So
you don't inherently dislike her because she supports things that maybe you don't. You're able to separate the person from their policy. How dare you, Bold? So apparently, I'm not really sure what to think. I do remember she did have a couple of witty responses there. How didn't she say? Oh, she said something about we should act more civil on the stage, or was that another candidate? I remember somebody had a sound.
I think she was one of the people who said that. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, according to courts, they're saying people who will like this candidate, folks looking for a Goldilocks candidate, neither too left nor too right, and a woman who appeals to Midwestern voters who will hate this candidate. Democrats to her left may be opposed to Klobuchar's centrist appeal. So that's kind of, she's the reasonable Democrat. She's just the right temperature of porridge, if that's your porridge that you enjoy. If you want to scald or freeze your mouth, then you better look elsewhere. So what are your thoughts, Bold?
Well, when I made a profile of Klobuchar back in, I think it was February for the channel, there wasn't much to talk about, and there still isn't that much to talk about. And from what I understand, she's really made her career out of being just a dependable person for the Democratic Party. But as far as the Kavanaugh hearing, what she was doing was going after the alcohol angle and trying to say, well, if you drink so much, maybe you're not fit to be on the court. But I would think that if he was such an alcoholic, then he would have had a few DUIs since whatever happened back in the 80s, or he would have had,
didn't we have one or two recent presidents that either had received inquiries from law enforcement and or written in their book that they may have drank, smoked, as well as maybe sniffed some other things as well. I mean, like,
Yeah. So well,
yeah, I think
that's
that's one of the things we're
so
past.
the presidency and the Supreme Court are two different things, and I think that
Fair.
if you want to, like, if Amy Klobuchar wants to make that point that, oh, if you're an alcoholic you shouldn't be on the Supreme Court, that's a fair point. But I think in this case she was really, she was making a mountain out of a molehill. And then when he responded and said, "Wait, you don't have beers either," and she was like, "No," and she kind of, and later she was like, How could he insinuate that when my father was an alcoholic and abused me?" Well, you're the one who started out with the alcoholic thing. So, I wouldn't say she's a horrible candidate, and I think people on the left, despite what the Quartz article says, they absolutely hate her because she's openly said she's not going to be for student loan debt forgiveness and she's not going to be for universal health care. So I don't really see any chance of her winning anything. And, this picture of her in the snow, which was her announcement, press conference over in Minnesota. Um, I just don't think she has the wherewithal to succeed on the national stage. There's also the precedent that there have been two Democratic candidates from Minnesota that won the nomination, and then were just like it was Humphrey in '68 was beaten by Nixon. That was a pretty close result. And then in 1984, Mondale ran from Minnesota and was just clobbered by Reagan. So she is not going to be a good option, in my opinion.
All right, then. Now we come to the man, the myth, the legend, Senator Bernie Sanders from the great state of the Vermont. Though he is Brooklyn born, he has been in Vermont for a number of years. He was the former mayor of Burlington. I worked with an individual several years ago that was a very vehement Sanders supporter. I did caution him throughout the summer we were working together that never underestimate how pissed off the American people were. Apparently, for better or worse, I was right about that, and we do have Donald Trump as president of the United States. So I believe he's the self-identified democratic socialist. So basically, he's promoting a number of different public policies, such as making college tuition free, student loan forgiveness, as well as increasing Social Security benefits. He's planning on paying most of this through taxes on financial institutions. My worries with Senator Sanders is I love the ethos. I love the pathos. I just have disagreements with the logos, how he would physically go about doing it. I love the populist, very strong message of basically being willing to do not what is easy, but what is hard. The big thing is, just from my basic, just standard degree of studying management and stuff like that, it's like you can do stuff like that to businesses, but the business will just adapt. And I fear that you're not going to be able to raise the funds necessarily that you would want to do it. So, I mean, some of the things, good idea. I mean, personally, as far as state assisted higher education, my big thing is when he just goes out there and says free college, I feel like that's a bit disingenuous, because I think one of the things we should focus on are post-high school based work skills. So whether that's going to school to study to become an engineer such as yourself, going to study business, or whatever topic may be of interest that's going to help you earn a good, honest living, I really feel the lack of focus on trade-based skills is something that really bothers me, just because I know plenty of folks. If I go down to just the standard Legion and I just talk to folks, some of the best, most successful folks in the community, they're carpenters, they're electricians, they're plumbers, and they're doing good, hard-working, honest work, helping to literally build America. So since we're in the internet-based age, I know a lot of other folks, even, yes, the whole learning to code is a thing. I've actually built my first website with the assistance of Optimus, of course. Thank you, Optimus, for the first time in like 20 years now. Like, I'm a noob because I've been out of it for so long, and I am starting to develop personal skills as well. So my big thing is I like the man. I disagree with him on a number of the ways he wants to go about things. So, Bold, your take on Senator Sanders?
Yeah, done a lot of stuff on Bernie Sanders and this channel. I've defended a lot of things that have been, or I've defended him against things that have been said about him that are untrue many times, despite the fact that I personally think he's a piece of crap and a horrible person. But I think you have to maintain honesty when you're talking about people in politics, or else you'll become one of the smear merchants. So what would I say about the debate on Thursday? I don't think he did a very good job. But the problem is, as I've said, that in 2016 he had a clearer objective, which was to show a contrast between him and Hillary Clinton. And the challenge is now that there are other people who are trying to copycat Bernie, and that's a different challenge. And I don't know if he's going to be able to adapt to it. And it's not really his fault in that sense. So I think he was more alert. Certainly did a better job than Biden, who we'll get to. But really, the problem with Bernie, I would say, is that he is a wimp, and he's always been a wimp. And just like he was when he was in Seattle, and the BLM people said, they went up on the stage and bullied him and said, "Hey, we want to speak first before you go," and he just let them do it. Well, this time Swalwell was saying, "Hey, are you going to take those guns off the street and confiscate them or not?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, sure." It was like, have a spine once in a while. Have at least a little bit of self-respect. And he started doing this whole thing where he's just calling Trump a racist and a homophobe and a sexist, just like the rest of the Democrats. So, in my opinion, since the 2016 election, a lot of the Democrats have started to copy Bernie, and Bernie started to copy a lot of them.
No, I hear you. So, all right, now we have Mr. Jay Inslee. All right, so he's the Washington State governor and veteran Congress member that threw his hat in the ring on March 1st on a platform of environmental protection and stopping climate change. And I remember he did differentiate himself as he was the climate guy, who has also employed Bill Nye, you see what I did there, to help produce some videos on climate change as well. As far as all I know about him, his big number one universal thing is fighting climate change. I believe he may have even referred to something of being almost like an Andrew Yang instead of the whole concept of UBI, of just focusing on combating climate change, transitioning to a 100% green 100% clean energy and net zero greenhouse gas pollution. So, he's talking about removing subsidies from the fossil fuel industry, and he does support the Green New Deal. So if he supports the Green New Deal, you know what that means, man. We're no more burgers right now. We're going to have to start growing them. So what are your thoughts on Mr. Ainsley?
Yeah, I think he didn't come off well in the debate, and I would say that he certainly got enough stage time, which is, that's a challenge in and of itself. But, to focus entirely on climate, I think is a huge mistake. In parts of the country, especially if you're trying to win primary votes in Texas, he's going to win zero that way. If he wants to win primary votes in the fracking states, Indiana, Indiana not as much, Pennsylvania, Ohio, he's doomed, and he's basically hinging his campaign on attracting votes in states like his own and Oregon, and probably along the eastern seaboard, because climate change is really it is, I would say, a media-centered agenda. It's not really something that day-to-day people care about. Maybe they should if you're one of the people who believes in a lot of the issues, which we've already gone over, but I don't think it's a winning campaign issue.
All right. No, I hear you, man. But you know what? Hey, he's bringing knowledge to the for the climate change stuff and things. So, all right. So now we have Mr. John Hickenlooper. So he's a geologist and businessman who served 2 terms in Denver as mayor before being elected as the Colorado governor back in 2010. So he's the gentleman, I believe, that was highlighting himself with the things he's actually done in Colorado. His big thing apparently is just cutting a lot of red tape to do business and help it actually focus on current regulations and keeping them in compliance. So he seems to be a lot more of a centrist individual, not really rocking the boat too hard, and not necessarily progressive parts of the Democratic caucus are the biggest fans. I really don't have much to say about him. I mean, he seemed like he kept pushing the things that he's done. Folks will criticize him on the things he's done, and oh yeah, he also founded a brewery. So I guess I give him a couple of points for that.
So yeah, on this article, they actually show him at an event in New Hampshire, and they misspell it New Hampshire, possibly as a pun about Colorado.
I see that, New Hampshire.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So the thing is,
only been decriminalized. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, and I tell you, because I'm not going to tell you how to vote, because I don't like to tell people that, but I would say you should personally, Memes, look into him more, because I think he's a little bit more of your type of candidate. Even though I don't think he's going anywhere, but you might as well do it while he's still in the race. So the issue with Hickenlooper is that he's continuously said that he doesn't think that socialism is going to resonate with the American voter, and he said at the California convention that if
he was the guy that got booed. That's right. Yeah.
So he said if people don't be careful, we're going to reelect the worst president in history. So while I don't agree with him on that, because I would say that I'm further into the Trump camp than into any other candidate's camp, the thing is that he does have a little bit more of a management profile, both as a business person and as a former mayor and governor. But I don't think that his message is for 2020. He would probably have done better to sit this race out, let this race happen the way it is, which in all likelihood, whoever runs is not going to be able to win against Trump the way it looks now, and then run in 2024 as the face of a retooled and reimagined Democratic Party, or even as an independent. But the fact is that on the debate stage, I think that he did his best to push back against the Medicare for All, against a lot of the other hardcore redistribution of wealth policies, but he is not going to win. He has no movement behind him, and I think that in many cases, people don't understand that you can. First of all, like Stormy Horseface Daniels is saying, his name is too wacky to be president. But beyond that, you've been in politics for this many years. There's always a governor that thinks that they're going to be able to take charge and win. I remember the person I think he reminds me the most of is Giuliani in 2008, who was like, yeah, we're going to put all of our chips on Florida, and if we win Florida, we'll win the nomination. Well, he got smoked in Florida, and it never happened. So I don't think he has much chance.
Yeah, and I do kind of get a general feeling, again, I don't know what's in another person's head nor heart, but I think some of the folks that are making a bid right now may be kind of setting in place a potential 2024 run. So now we get to the newfound, more recent man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Beto O'Rourke. So apparently many folks were not aware of him until his candidacy for Texas senator against Mr. Cruz, where he didn't win, but he was putting up a good fight and people were thinking that he had the potential to win. Apparently he was tossing out some memetics of President Kennedy. Folks were comparing him to. He does seem to be a bit more of a younger candidate at the age of 46 as well. He is also part of the skateboarding community. How involved he's in that, I don't know. All I know is he likes to sometimes come out on a skateboard and stand on some counters, which, hey, I mean, if he's energetic and stuff, power to the guy. My thing that I've taken away is I think he's trying to be too many things to too many people. And I get it. You're trying to represent a very broad swath, but at the same time, if you're going to take a very hard and less nuanced stance on certain things, you got to realize every action we take, especially if you're just trying to help out certain folks or certain communities, if you're going to do that, the detriment to others and taking resources away that could be used in a more, I don't even know if it's egalitarian. I mean, he seems to be trying to be everything to everybody because he was the initial candidate who started speaking Spanish. Again, not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just when you compare it to Mr. Castro's grasp on the Spanish language, I mean, you're not really comparing apples to oranges. You're comparing an apple to an apple pie at that point in my mind. I think he had a lot of energy, but at this point, I think folks are seeing a very diverse group of candidates, and I'm not sure. I think he'll be around for another couple of debates, but unless he really establishes some traction, I don't really see him moving forward too far in the process as far as actually being nominated. Your thoughts, Bold?
Yeah, I would say from every single reaction I've seen, he did the worst. That was my perception too. He was really performing the way you would expect him to, which is
Could Cory Booker's look on his face.
Well, Cory Booker, I think in his case he was just kind of mad that Beto had thought of the thing that he wanted to do, but. In terms of Beto's own performance, which is, I think, in many ways, it was just a disaster. So you have to remember that when Beto was running in 2018 against Cruz, it was a clear distinction, and he was running as a sitting congressman, and the wind was at his back in terms of the Democratic primary because. He was probably the most dynamic candidate of the Democrats in Texas, and he had the most funding and the most of a following, and there was a lot of media support for him. And of course, a lot of it was built around the fact that the media hates Ted Cruz. And he still lost, but he put up a respectable performance. But it's not the same game. It's the same as when think about it. It's almost as if you had somebody who came in like fourth at the French Open in tennis, and then you put him to swim in the Olympics like a 400-meter relay. It's just a completely different game. So
it's a different event, yeah.
Right. So it's whereas you were one-on-one at the tennis match, you're against a whole group of people in the debates and in the nominations. So really, what Ted Cruz he didn't learn anything, first of all, from that campaign. And then after the campaign, he had that whole bizarre situation where he ate dirt. And then he announces for presidency. And really, his message is kind of it's completely focus group centered. And he's always going and trying to first of all, there was that ridiculous rally on the border where he said eventually he said, walls end lives and stuff like that. They don't save lives, they end lives, which was ridiculous statement. Dale Earnhardt could probably agree with him if he was still alive, but sorry, too soon, guys. But sorry. But in any case, so Beto, in the debate itself, he was horrible, and it's the same type of behavior that you saw from his appearance on The View when he was saying, "Oh, I'm going to relaunch my campaign." And then he was apologizing, and his face was looking towards his lap and everything. That's not presidential at all. Marianne Williamson behaved presidential during the debate. It wasn't a president that I would want, but she behaved presidential. If you saw, for example, de Blasio, he behaved presidential during the debate, but he's not a presidential person because he would be a horrible, horrible administrator. Beto O'Rourke can't even pull off the act. And that's the real problem. So when it's not just the pandering in Spanish, it's not just the fact that his policies are clearly themselves, just almost slavishly asking voters to like him. And then there's the whole thing, I'm a skateboarder, I'm a hacker, I go out to the desert to meditate, I like poetry and all that. Those are things that people don't really care about. And if he was to come and campaign on that in the key areas of the country, any of the swing states, whether it's in the Midwest or whether it's in North Carolina, he would be laughed out of town. He would be, and I think he is being laughed out of town. I think when he comes into these places and he stands up on a bar counter, people politely listen, and then when he leaves, they probably are like, well, after that, should we have a round of drinks and go on the pachinko machine, because it doesn't really start any real discussion about anything. So yeah, I think Beto O'Rourke is a joke, and it's clear that his entire candidacy in 2018 was inflated by the media, similar to the way they inflated the DNC tried to get Joseph Kennedy when he delivered the response to the State of the Union, and people were just focused on his moist face. It's just a complete and utter failure.
No, I hear. I think he may be an individual that may be kind of positioning himself for a post-President Trump run if he's elected again. All right, we have next up Kirsten Gillibrand. So she has come to be known as the Me Too senator, quote unquote, basically after calling out Trump's sexism and leading the push for Democratic Senator Al Franken to resign, basically after his Photogate incident there. Yeah, I mean, she seems to be kind of a bit more of an establishment candidate. I mean, again, she is receiving money from law firms, Wall Street institutions. Basically, again, according to the Quartz article, her big thing is pushing for U.S. to require companies adopt a universal paid family leave policy. So that does sound like it's including basically any type of spouses paid leave along with the maternity. But then again, at the same time, I got to acknowledge that I believe President Trump had been pushing, or at least he had been delegating to Ivanka to try to promote a maternity leave that is guaranteed in some form, and apparently it didn't end up going through. I mean, again, she does seem to be kind of I hate saying a Hillary Clinton with less baggage, but that's what I have in my head. I mean, again, I don't have really much to say about her. She seems to be just the general Democratic feeling, and with kind of a bit of a progressive push as far as the Me Too side of things. Your thoughts on Senator Gillibrand?
Yeah, I think Kirsten Gillibrand in the past would have been a very interesting. She should have run in 2016, to be honest with you, because she would have been a little bit more of a candidate with, some more vitality to her than Hillary Clinton, but still, I guess, appealing to that sector of the voting population. Which let's not be deluded. I mean, there were a lot of people who did vote for Hillary Clinton. There was some enthusiasm for her among, a certain part of the country. I think Gillibrand could have been a better candidate that year. And the fact is that I think she's a chameleon. Early in her career, she tried to portray herself as a more moderate, centrist Democrat, and she was in fact trying to convince many of the upstate New York voters that she would preserve a lot of Second Amendment rights. But she's revealed herself to be just as far to the left as many of her counterparts. In fact, she has bought into the Medicare for All program. So no, I don't think she adds anything to the race. I think if you think that you're voting for anything different, you're not. You'd probably be just as well voting for Bernie or for any of the other candidates in that area of the party, like Castro or, like I said, there's not much that I think sets her apart.
All right.
And then Dave McDowell is putting in NXIVM. Yes, she does have personal connection to the NXIVM scandal. So, and in fact, some of her donors are implicated in that scandal. So that's a problem.
All right. So next up, apologies for my racism, was Mr. Wayne Massam the mayor of Miramar, Florida. Was he in one of the past Democratic debates?
No, he wasn't able to make the cut, so I don't have anything to
Okay.
say about him. If you
Okay,
have
I
anything,
get.
yeah.
Yeah, no. He's apparently a former NFL football player. He fighting for climate change and stuff, but then again, he calls out the Democrats as saying they're going too far. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. We'll skip over him. My apologies at some
Sorry,
point.
buddy.
But
Try harder.
yeah. No, I'm looking. I'm like, wait, was he there? And I didn't realize it. Wow.
No, he wasn't
Okay,
there.
Tim
There were
Tim
four.
Ryan, Mr.
Yeah, there were
Tim
four
Ryan was
candidates
in the
that weren't
debate,
there.
though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so he served 8 terms as in Congress. Basically, he's native from Ohio. He's been a big backer of union labor, renewable energy, as well as a supporter of a single-payer healthcare system. He's talking about revitalizing American manufacturing, public education, and supports struggling U.S. veterans. And he's got a big focus on working-class voters. Yeah. So, I mean, his big idea for the economy, he's talking about creative jobs in electrical vehicle manufacturing. Okay, now I remember some of the things he was saying from the debate. Big business, he's pro-business, pro fracking, and he cautions the Democrats about moving too far to the left. Okay, I'm remembering some of at least what I took away from it. I mean, he seemed to be, I don't know, pretty solid, not that much of I think he seems to be aligned with a lot of Democrats out there. Some of the more progressive base don't seem to be big fans of him, but I mean, as far as what I remember, I mean, he seemed to have a fairly solid debate performance there. I don't think he really made many missteps, unless was he the one that had gotten a little hiccup with Miss Gabbards?
Yeah, that was the one.
Okay, I don't really have much to say about that. I think you might have a bit of a different take. So now that I'm remembering that, it depends on who's going to continue to get those donations to move on to the next level. I'm not sure if he was able to differentiate himself enough. I don't know your thoughts.
Yeah, so I have a little more familiarity with Tim Ryan because his district is pretty close to where I was working up until now. So he is, I would say, the outdated labor Democrat, and it's interesting to wonder where that sector of the party is going to go. A lot of them are rejecting the Green New Deal part of the party, and I think that Ryan is trying to bridge the gap between them. He's similar to our Senator Sherrod Brown because he's heavily backed by the labor unions. The steelworkers and the IBEW and the SEIU and all of those, which are, I personally I'm opposed to most of their agenda. I think that they were part of the group that wrecked the economy here in the Midwest, the labor unions, but to be fair, I think that they could be a part of rebuilding it. I don't think that the unions should be destroyed. I think that they have to be included in rebuilding the economy. And I think Ryan would have been a good person to do that, but for the fact that he's never actually done anything to do that. He did vote for the auto bailout, and now he's criticizing GM for getting the auto bailout, which at the time was a bad idea, and Ron Paul was advocating against it. So, my personal opinion, being as it is that I was a supporter of Ron Paul, and I still support his son, is that Ryan is the type of politician that advocates for a certain policy, claiming it's going to help, and then when it goes sour, he complains about the other people that didn't hold up their end of the bargain. But he supported it.
Oh, so he was for it before he was against it.
Well, he was for it, and he's never gone against it, and he wants GM to stay in Lordstown, which is where their big plant is in Trumbull County here. But he's blaming Donald Trump more for the movement of the plant than he is GM. But the fact is that GM has decided to embrace electric vehicle manufacturing, just not in Ohio. So whose fault is that? That's not Donald Trump's fault. That's GM's fault. So I think if Ryan would have focused a lot of his wrath on GM, just like Sherrod Brown did, by the way, like I think it's fine that they're angry at them. I think the bailout was wrong, but they voted for it. And bailouts, I think, are really one of the issues that people, if you're a progressive or if you're a libertarian, you know that corporate welfare is one of the worst forms of welfare. And he should have been against it at the time, but he couldn't have done it because he would have been voted out. He wouldn't have been able to win because his constituents would have said, well, aren't you trying to save our jobs and whatever? Well, in the end, we did get the bailout, and GM is still not really run by very, very competent people. And other than that, yeah, I think Tulsi scorched him, and I think his campaign is probably going to sink pretty fast, and he can go back to doing nothing, which is what he's good at.
All right, then. So we move forward to Mr. Eric Swalwell. Now, according to courts, his big issue is basically gun control and gun reform. Now, is he the individual you're talking about that basically asked Senator Sanders straight up, and then Senator Sanders kind of like, sure, whatever, let's go with it?
That's him.
Okay, all right. So that's sounding very familiar there. What I find interesting is he's focusing on firearms control, which, I mean, power to him. I'm sure he has particular reasons for that. Now, his big ideas are expanding access to college by providing interest-free federal loans, which is an interesting thing and much different than Senator Sanders' pitch of free college. Allowing employers to make tax-free contributions to pay off their employee student debt. Again, you're having businesses invest in people, which, I mean, that does sound like a good thing to me. And helping those in work-study programs graduate without owing anything. So I don't see any explanation about that. I'm sure it's linked here in a further article. But they're saying that he is supported by a number of more moderate Republicans. Again, I guess it depends on where the Second Amendment ranks in your hierarchy of importance there. Again, it kind of bothers me that very often with the whole firearms regulation stuff, it really isn't. We're not talking about reforming the Second Amendment. We're just talking about doing things that may or may not necessarily be constitutional. Again, he didn't really differentiate himself that much, aside from maybe just a couple of little exchanges there. I don't know, Bold. What are your thoughts? You seem to have more knowledge than myself.
Yeah, Eric Swalwell is possibly the only candidate worse than Kamala Harris, but we'll talk first about his performance in the debate. He performed well, and it's the same idea as with de Blasio. He was assertive. He was able to get time when I think the debate moderators weren't really wanting to give him time. And I think that he did well in first of all, he embarrassed Pete Buttigieg when he got him to admit, well, you didn't fire a police chief, didn't you? After the shooting, the one that killed, I think his name was Eric Logan. So he flustered Pete Buttigieg, he flustered Bernie, he got under Joe Biden's skin. So yeah, this is a guy who is proving he wants something. Okay. That's as far as the debate performance, which I gave in my reaction video. I think it was either a B+ or an A-. As far as him as a person, he is an awful, awful politician. He is one of the top liars in the Russiagate, canard, which is going on still to this day, if you can believe it. And he continues to peddle his stuff by, changing the standards and moving the goalposts, and talking about how, the collusion wasn't really the issue, it's the obstruction. Well, you were talking about collusion for a couple years, and you were talking about how the president is, even during the debate, he was saying, we're going to break up with Russia and get back together with NATO. Well, there was no evidence in the investigation that you cried for that there was any sort of collusion with Russia, any sort of either illegal or legal collusion, whether you like it or not. So his whole campaign is based on a lie, which is his perspective of the Russia saga, and then B, it's based on this totalitarian gun control policy and this idea that you can guarantee safety for people. Clay Travis, who's a liberal Democrat like yourself, but more of the traditional JFK Democrat. So, do you know who he is? He's a Fox Sports guy.
I'm not really familiar, no.
So he did a debate breakdown too, but he's said before that he kind of he still considers Joe Biden to be the front runner, although after the debate he kind of had set misgivings about it. But he made the point that Eric Swalwell had that quote where he said, I try to remember my kids' clothes every night because I think that, or every morning when they go to school, because I think that I might have to identify them in the morgue later. Well, it turns out, according to Travis, that his kids aren't even of school age. One of them is a toddler and one of them is an infant. So he's just this demagogue. And I think that the more power he has, the more danger we're in. So that's my thoughts on Eric Swalwell.
All right. So I don't believe Mr. Mike Gravel was in the debate, was he?
Yeah, unfortunately he wasn't, but I do have something to say on him. But you can go ahead if you want to talk first.
No. Get your piece in.
Excuse me. So Mike Gravel, I think he would have been a good person to provide a second support for Tulsi Gabbard's foreign policy agenda. He is really, really, really to the left, and I would say he's the furthest to the left of any of the candidates in the race. And I think genuinely, after watching again his performance from 2008, he provided a valuable contrast to the rest of the Washington politicians. He was stridently anti-war. He was talking about, and yes, he is pro open borders. I'm not saying I would support him. And he, most of his ideas about our international relations, I think would be way, way, way too far. But in this environment, when we're talking about, some of these people want a war with Russia. A lot of these people want a war with Iran. A lot of these people are willing to invade Venezuela. I would have been totally refreshed from seeing someone like him on stage. I think he would have done a good job. He did a good job in 2008. And, it's a shame he didn't make it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's from what I just know based upon Styx's general coverage. He seemed to be a fan because he seemed to be the one of the left individuals, aside from maybe a Senator Sanders or so, that's got years and years of receipts. But all right, moving right along to the next candidate that was in there, we got Mayor Pete Buttigieg. So he is the Democratic mayor down in South Bend, and he seems to have gotten a lot of media coverage as he is quite good at articulating himself. He does happen to be a member of the LGBTQ community. He's a very well-educated Harvard and Oxford individual as well. Highly smart, not really on the national scene until he announced there. I believe CNN had done some quite positive pieces on him as well. But he also does seem to be a very intelligent individual that's not really... seems to be more in line with a large amount of the Democratic voting bloc, maybe not quite as much. Some progressives as well. I don't know. Some folks are criticizing him over his experience. Some more religious folks maybe aren't the biggest fans, but I mean, I do have a generally positive view over some of the things that Mayor Pete had said. I don't know. I've heard folks say that he could actually be a potential silver bullet to, proverbial, of course, to defeating President Trump. So what are your thoughts on Mayor Pete?
Yeah, Buttigieg, when he announced in 2017 he was running for DNC chair, I think he did a poor job in that race, but I think he's done a much better job in this race. And I think the debate on Thursday, it was... I don't think he did a good or bad job. I think he was probably the most average candidate, and that's the whole problem. That he's average, and I think he's good for people who are middle of the road Democrats as well as Republicans who sit while they pee. But the fact is that he is going to lose, and I'll explain very simply why. The whole issue with the shooting in South Bend has alienated him from a sector that he needed to gain voters from, which is, of course, the black vote. And, I get it that most of us we criticize politicians for pandering, but if you're running in any of these southern states, which have a lot of delegates, so South Carolina is one of the first 3 states, I believe, and then later you're going to have Texas and Louisiana and Arkansas, and so all those states, the majority of the Democratic primary goers are black voters. So his handling of the situation in South Bend, which honestly, I don't think it's his fault that it happened. It's not working, and it's going to hamper him, and he's going to do very poorly in those primaries. And I think his candidacy is toast. And other than that, I mean, his policies, I think he masks his left-wing agenda much better than some of these other people. But in reality, I would say that he is looking for being like the gay Obama, or, some people would say the openly gay Obama, because some people have theories about Obama's wife.
Hey, what two consenting adults do behind closed doors is their business.
Right, but the thing is that's his whole thing. His whole campaign is on harping on the fact that Mike Pence is evil, and Mike Pence is a Christian fanatic, and he doesn't represent Christianity. And he says he constantly is behaving as if the Republican Party is still the party of 1996, when the Christian coalition was really in vogue there. And most people know that the Republicans have, I would say, diversified since then. They have there are significant supporters within the Republican Party that are either pro-gay or they are themselves. And it's just not the same world that was back then. So,
didn't candidate Trump? He just wanted everyone to give a standing round of applause for, was it the log cabin Republicans or something?
For Peter Thiel, who's the gay dude who's he's a CEO of what it's not Square, it's one of the other big tech.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he spoke at the convention. They had an openly gay guy speak at the convention, and Trump is probably the most pro-gay president there is, and a lot of he's well Trump's done a brilliant job of triangulating with the evangelicals. They still support him even after all of the things that he's done, including launching an initiative to decriminalize gay relationships worldwide. So, it's something that I think a lot of people are moving beyond. Obviously, in the gay community, it would probably be a good way to attract votes, because there are people in the gay community that continue to say, well, we need to continue to campaign for more equality, even though legally most thresholds for equality have already been reached. But I don't think it's a winning strategy. And honestly, like I said, the issues with the Black Lives Matter movement, who he insulted about a week and a half ago by saying, I'm not trying to get your vote, those are going to blow up in his face, and his candidacy is over, because that's a more important voting public in the South, which is what you need in order to win the nomination.
Ooh, I wasn't aware those were words that he had spoke. That's okay.
Yeah, it was. I mean, he didn't have a good day, and it wasn't really his fault, but those are things that he can't really control anymore.
Well, it is what it is. So, all right, we're moving right along to Vice President Joe Biden. He was a latecomer to announce for the race. He's currently polling number 1 because, well, I think most folks at least know who Joe Biden is, so that actually helps. He actually was in the White House, as well as the Naval Observatory, served as vice president, had served in the Senate for a number of years. And you know what? I got to give Joe some credit, because, I mean, if he actually was riding the train an hour or so each day to and from Delaware, I got to give the guy some credit. I mean, I think my big thing with Joe Biden is I would have liked to see him have run last time. And I do think he probably holds a bit of regret of that. I understand he was going through a number of family things with the loss of his son at the time, but Joe Biden, at least at that time, I probably could have seen myself more likely to vote for him, just because as far as combating the Trump mimetic, I mean, he could say, what was it? What was the saying? It's like, GM is alive, and there was...
And Osama bin Laden is dead, yeah.
Exactly. And just, that's a very simple thing that conveys a huge amount of message to just the American folks and stuff. But as far now, it's, and again, he does seem to be more of the quote unquote corporate candidate as well, because especially when they were talking about the borders and stuff like that, and he kept getting asked, he kept pointing out that person shouldn't be the focus of it. So again, he didn't answer the question. I mean, you can argue saying that's smart politics there, but it's very interesting seeing somebody with the current political gravitas as a Joe Biden within the field of candidates. So I know we'd had spoken a bit about him earlier as well. What are your thoughts on Vice President Biden?
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're saying was true up until this race, and like you said, it's kind of an indication that he should have run in 2016. But I think this debate was a horrible performance for him. In fact, on Friday, I saw reports that a lot of his donors are fleeing, not just because of that, but because of his issues with the segregationist senators and things like that. So it's really an issue more of can he hold it together while he's still at the top? And I think the debate showed that he is not going to be able to do that unless he can find a middle ground between accepting criticism and B, reacting to it. And he didn't react very well to the criticism on Thursday. In fact, he looked like he was a little bit out of the. I think he was like disconnected from the whole fight. He was trying to stand there and be above the exchange, and it just wasn't going to work because the other people knew that they had to go after Joe Biden, especially Swalwell early on. But I think Kamala Harris fired the golden BB that has, it's kind of got his campaign taking on a lot of water right now. I saw a story today. Let me see if I even have it here.
So you think she penetrated the SS Biden's hull and he's starting to just take on water and he might not be able to bail it out fast enough?
Yeah, he's in major trouble, and it's not something that can just be, it's not something that can be corrected naturally because Biden is dealing with a whole new Democratic Party that's sort of passed him by. It says here, Biden supports St. Harris moves up to third place after the Democratic debate. So this is from today. And, now Harris is up to 12%. So you see this trend where Elizabeth Warren is gaining voters, possibly because of her competition with Bernie. And at the same time, Kamala Harris has benefited from the slide for Joe Biden. And really, I think that the age is going to be a real factor. In the second debate, if he reacts too angrily, people will start to say, wait, so essentially Joe Biden is he's an angry old man and he doesn't know how to relate to modern voters. And he could make another gaffe like he's done in other public settings. And I don't think he'd made a major gaffe on Thursday, but he's just, he is a mess. And this idea that he was going to coast to the nomination, which a lot of people were putting forward, including, like I said, Clay Travis, he's a sports guy that I listen to sometimes, but he's got some good political and legal ideas. I think that they are out of their minds. They don't understand that the party is passed by Joe Biden, and the guy's run for president before already 2 times, and the same flaws that were present with him those other 2 times are still there. And then you have the way that the party's changed. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on him.
All righty then. So, all right. That brings us to Mr. Michael Bennet as well. This Colorado senator announced on May 2nd on CBS this morning that he was entering the race. Bennet may be best known outside his state for his January 2019 excoriation of Senator Ted Cruz, where he criticized the Texas Republican senator's crocodile tears during the national government shutdown, noting that Senator Cruz pushed for a shutdown in 2013 when Colorado was underwater. So he's also credited with helping pass the Affordable Care Act, as well as speaking out against President Trump's attacks on said bill. He's got some spiciness to him, as he's told told American voters that, quote, don't have to settle for being as, quote, terrible as Trump or as the quote unquote tyrants of the Freedom Caucus. Ooh, all right. So, all right. His biggest idea for the economy is Medicare X, which he calls a true public option for healthcare that bridges the gap between Sanders' Medicare for All plan, which he calls unrealistic, as well as private healthcare. So, okay, now wasn't he the gentleman talking about that? A lot of Americans, their big fear is that whole transitional period. Like that's a period of chaos where folks don't know what's going on, just because that's something that would need to be done. Again, I have no idea how he plans on going about that. I mean, again, he doesn't really strike me as, again, one of the major candidates. I realize he had a couple of points in the debates where he was able to put his thoughts out there. He does seem to have not necessarily the exact same thoughts as other people, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on Mr. Bennett Bold? I don't have too much.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, and I don't think he really stood out. I think he put forward like a good effort because he did rebuke Sanders because of his, I guess, Sanders adventurism, you could call it, with Medicare for All. But, when he invoked the Holocaust and said, oh, refugees, blah, 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 a lot of people already have heard that from a million other people, and it's not really resonating from this guy. The public option idea, I think people are either ready to go for Medicare for All or they're not. That's my impression of the way the race is playing out. And to be associated with Obamacare, if he were to be the nominee, Trump would probably just use it as huge ammunition against him and saying, well, with people like Michael Bennett, this is how we got into the mess we're in now. Plus, the Supreme Court could strike down Obamacare I think it's either this year or during the next session. There's a case pending in the Supreme Court. So, no, I don't think that Michael Bennett has much of a chance, and I think he's done. So,
all right then.
yeah.
So now Steve Bullock was he in the debate? I don't.
No, he didn't make
particularly
it.
remember. Okay, that's what I thought. So,
So-
all right. So we're moving right on to Big Bill de Blasio, Mayor
Big Bird.
Bill. So
Yeah.
no, just because he's the candidate that may or may not most resemble a Sasquatch, that we don't judge a person on their looks. That's not right. But Bill, again, we did discuss him a bit there. He's the current mayor of New York City that folks have been criticizing him for getting in the race. But I mean, overall, dude, I thought he presented himself well within the debate. Again, you can argue that he was pandering to certain voting groups. But again, my general takeaway is he did come off as more presidential, a strong candidate. He spoke clearly. You may not agree with the guy, but I thought he did one of the better jobs that first night. So since we've discussed him, did you have any additional thoughts on Big Bill?
Yeah, again, I mean, we agree on his performance in the debate. I think he did a good job. I think that his main weakness will be the actual way that he's administered the city, and a number of. He also has a scandal that's kind of been underreported with donors that never got effectively prosecuted from his 2017 race for mayor. So he certainly has skeletons in his closet and a lot of angry constituents back home.
All right, then. The last candidate on the list was Joe Sestak. Now Joe was in the debate?
No,
Or was
he actually just declared. So
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if most people won't even know about him by the time of the next debate.
Yeah, I think I heard something about him briefly, and again, I wasn't sure if I just confused him with anyone else there. And well, that's it for our friends that are vying for the Democratic nomination. So I don't know. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on at all, Bold?
No, I think we both showed the perspective. Even we're on opposite sides of really the ideological divide, but I think a lot of people, doesn't matter what side you're on, you saw the same debate, except for some of the people who are really, really stuck in the mindset of the party. I think most people saw a lot of the same flaws and issues that we talked about today. Really, I mean, I guess the question is, would you consider voting like third party or for Trump or for somebody that's not a Democrat personally?
I mean, it would depend on who it is, man. I realize a lot of folks say it's a wasted vote, but it's like we were talking about before, man. I personally don't think politics is binary. I think a lot of folks have a number of different things that are important to them, and it's just that we don't really understand. Just because it's like if somebody says, well, they support the Second Amendment, does that necessarily mean that is the number one voting issue? Or if somebody says, well, I would like to see some form of Medicare for all, does that mean that's the absolute number one thing? No, we're each individuals, and we do each have our own personal hierarchy of things that are important to us. So could I vote for a third party candidate? Sure, sure. And I do actually, it really bothers me that it hasn't really been since we had Ross Perot back in, what was it, like 92 or so, 92, 96, where we actually had a third party candidate that got 19% of the popular vote. He almost broke 1 in 5 in Americans actually voting for the man. So, I mean, that's something I do think we're missing, because it also, it's kind of like the whole number of folks kind of like supporting Marianne Williams to keep her on the stage. It's just a different voice out there that we're allowed to hear from, so folks can make up their own mind, rather than it seemingly to just devolve into who you hate least. Because I do remember when Mr. Perot was there and he put his hand around both candidates and he's like, listen, if you don't like what you see here, you got 2 other fine choices. And that's something that stuck with me, man. So I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say that it's almost guaranteed I'm not going to vote for a Democrat in 2020. Sorry, and I think the more that I see these people, in fact, there was a story from today where they're starting to criticize the Donald for his visit with Kim Jong Un, and it's like, dude, people have to fucking work. They can't just run around the country and eat pancakes like Tim Ryan. So, I see here Biden says he's coddling dictators, including Kim and Putin. Well, Biden, it used to be a lot of people were friends with Putin. So, maybe you're just not a friendly person.
Wasn't it at that time Senator Obama that said he would meet without precondition from perhaps individuals viewed as, if not actual dictators, from nations that were hostile to us? I do kind of remember that being something that was said, even if it wasn't done.
Yeah. And then you have, let me see here, Warren says our president shouldn't be squandering American influence on photo ops and exchanging love letters with a ruthless dictator. Instead, we should, well, it's Pride Month, Liz, so maybe he should be. So
I didn't know there was a D on there. My apologies for my bigotry. Okay.
What do you mean?
Oh,
no, I'm telling her.
It went over my head.
Yeah, nah. So she said that you shouldn't be exchanging love letters with Kim Jong Un.
So, I see what you did there. Okay.
So then Sanders said it weakened the State Department, and Klobuchar said that they're saying it's not going to lead to anything. Well, what's he supposed to do? Absolutely nothing. We have he's a dictator of a country with very a very trigger happy army, and he could also he could go back to threatening Japan every week.
ICBMs and thermonuclear weapons.
So it even says Tim Ryan said that he was like Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain meeting with Adolf Hitler. I think that these people are a disgrace, but that's about it. Let me see here. Here, long shot presidential candidate Andrew Yang broke from the pack, however, by praising Trump's meeting. Anything that improves the political climate on the Korean Peninsula and engages North Korea on its nuclear program is a good thing. Yeah, so good. I mean, good for Yang. Obviously they don't have to praise everything Trump does, but I think this is the one thing that most people should agree is better than going to war. So I think I'm done for today. How about you, man?
Oh, dude, we've done well over 3 hours, man. I'm pretty good right now. I've learned some stuff. So, no, thank you for having the chat with me.
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna put the music back on my end, but thanks, and we'll talk again soon if you want to get in touch later today. I gotta go do
Yeah.
something, but it
All
was good
right.
having
No,
you, and it was good being on your stream too for the first time.
cool. You mind if I re-upload this on my channel at all, man?
No, be my guest. Yeah.
Cool. All right. I'll talk to you later, Bold.
All right. See you
Peace out,
later.
man.
Bye bye.